Robert Caro spent 7 years researching his first book, The Power Broker, Robert Moses and the Fall of New York. The Pulitzer-Prize winning biography was chosen by the Modern Library for its 100 Greatest Books of the Century list. The Path to Power launched Robert Caro's award-winning series on the life of Lyndon Johnson. His next book, The Means of Ascent, ended with LBJ's election to the Senate in 1948. And now, the long-awaited third volume, Master of the Senate, is scheduled for release in April 2002. The third volume follows Lyndon Johnson's 12 years in the U.S. Senate. For the next 3 hours, Robert Caro will be taking your phone calls and emails as our guest on Book TV's In Depth.
Robert Caro's in our studios here in Washington, and this is what the brand new book looks like, his fourth book. Robert Caro's The Years of Lyndon Johnson, Master of the Senate. Mr. Caro, if you were writing the lead story based on what you know, the lead of the story based on what you know in this book, what would it be?
Well, he came to a Senate where the only thing that mattered was seniority. You weren't even supposed to speak on the floor the first year or two. In his first 2 years, he became the assistant leader of his party. In 4 years, he was the leader of his party. In 6 years, he was the majority leader. And then he set out to make the Senate pass the first civil rights bill since Reconstruction, and did it.
What's your favorite new thing in this book?
My favorite new thing is the passage of that 1957 Civil Rights Bill, because I'm interested in political power, and that is an example of getting something through when it just seems impossible to do it.
How did he do it?
Well, it takes me about 300 pages to tell that. At that time, you know, there were 15 great standing committees of the Senate. I think in that year, the Southerners were chairman of 8, and their great ally, Carl Hayden of Arizona, was chairman of the 9th. They had basically all the power in the Senate. Many of them were determined that a civil rights bill not pass, and Johnson set out to get it through by using every means. You know, when Johnson wanted to do something, he was going to do it. And he used power, he used persuasion, he used guile, he used parliamentary maneuvers, which he had brought to a new degree of effectiveness. It's a whole panoply of ways. You
have a picture in your book of Richard Brevard Russell, yes, of Georgia. Yes. Who is he, who was he, and what role did he play in the whole civil rights?
Well, you know, Russell is a figure who's sort of getting lost to American history now. And sometimes when I talk at colleges, people hardly know who he is. They only know that there's the Russell Senate Office Building. But for 25 years, he not only, he defeated every attempt to pass a civil rights bill in the United States Senate. He was a figure, on the one hand, of a unique patriotism. The respect in which he was held by his colleagues was unique. On the other hand, he was a great leader, but as I say in the book, he was a leader in the worst of causes.
Where did you get your best information, new information on Richard Russell?
Well, on Russell, my wife Ina went down to the Russell Library and spent a lot of time going through papers that I'm not sure anyone had ever looked at before. I went down to Winder. I am indebted to one of his aides, William Jordan, to take me, and you know, you begin to fully understand Richard Russell only when you go behind his house is this family graveyard in a grove of trees, and he built this immense obelisk, immense in terms of a little town, to his father and mother. And this is, whatever it says, to Richard Brevard Russell Sr., defender of the Old South, believer in the new. You know, you start to understand him down there. You say that Lyndon Johnson used to go to baseball games with Richard Russell. Did he like baseball? John Connolly once said to Lyndon Johnson, "I never knew you liked baseball." And Johnson said, "Oh, you know, I always liked it." Of course, he went with Russell because he wanted to get close to Russell. That was his great aim. When he came to the Senate, he realized right away that Richard Russell was the power in the Senate. He was simply the most powerful senator. senator. And Johnson took every means that he could. He joined Russell's committee. He actually had wanted to be on other committees, but Russell was on the Armed Services Committee because he said, this is a man whose whole life is the Senate and his work. If I'm not on his committee, I'm going to see him only in passing. So he went on that committee. Russell liked baseball, so he went to baseball games. Russell was a Civil War buff, so Johnson said, I would just love to go with you to the Civil War battlefield. He took every opportunity he could to be close to Russell.
This book has something unusual in the opening part of the book. I don't know that I've ever quite seen this before, where it's a color photograph of the current United States Senate. Was that your idea?
Yes, it was, but you have to say it's something that's almost never done anymore because it's so expensive to do colored end papers. And I said, but that is the place I wrote about. And it would be great to have a picture of it. Then in the rear end papers, we have the old Senate chamber before they moved into this.
Now, is this the chamber as it is today, or as it was during Lyndon Johnson's time?
As it was during Lyndon Johnson's time. You see how dim it was because they didn't have television then. So one of the aspects of the chamber was its cavernous gloom when you look down across it.
You went to some lengths to get a sense of what the Senate was like during the time that Lyndon Johnson was there, including having Senator Bill Bradley stand at the desk.
Yes.
And if I can see in this picture here, where is that? You can look up on the monitor and see where is the desk right here, right down.
Yes,
is that the
front row
desk?
center desk. Was Lyndon on the left side of the center aisle. I think you were pointing to the right side.
Right there.
Yes, that was Lyndon Johnson. Actually, it's the one across the aisle from it. That was the majority leader's desk. And Johnson would stand there at the edge of the well. Now that step is 6 inches high, and everyone would say about, Johnson of course was 6'3"3/4. And everyone would say how when he stood there, he towered over everybody. So one day Senator Bradley was kind enough to arrange for me to spend an entire afternoon on the floor of the Senate. And at the, it was a wonderful experience for me, of course. And at the end, he said, is there anything else I can do for you? I said, actually, there is. I've always wanted to know exactly how high Lyndon Johnson towered. And you, I know, since I'm a Princetonian, and I used to follow his basketball team around, are 6'4½", almost Johnson's height. Would you mind going over to the desk and standing there? Well, the Senate was still in session. Amendments are being voted on. Bradley stood. There was actually Bob Dole's desk at that moment, but Senator Dole wasn't there. Every so often, Senator Bradley would look at me and say, am I here long enough? But I knew I was never going to get a chance like this again. And it's funny. If you are lucky enough to do that, and through Senator Bradley's generosity I was able to, suddenly you realize he's so tall and the dais in the Senate is so low that when Nixon is presiding as vice president and Johnson is majority leader and they are dueling over civil rights, one of the things you see is that their eyes are almost the same level. Then you also see how tall Johnson looked. He'd stand at the edge of the well, and he ran that Senate. And when he wanted the vote, the senators would be in the well, but when Johnson wanted the vote to go faster, he'd raise his arm and go like this, and the clerks would call the roll faster. If he didn't have all his men on the floor, if he needed to round up some more votes, he would use this motion, and the vote would be called slower.
Senate historian told me that you even had the lights turned off in the Senate so that you could see what it was like now, because there's television cameras and all that. When did you do all this?
Well, when you say during this last 12 years, but I realized that the Senate then looked very different, although the furnishings are basically the same. It looked very different because the lights were so different. I want to say that, when you say the Senate historians, it's the historian Richard Baker and his associate historian Donald Ritchie. They would go to any length to try to help me visualize the Senate as it was then. And once I said, I have to see the lighting as it was, somehow they managed to come up with an elderly electrician who remembered the configuration of the lighting as it was before television, and they recreated it for me.
How many years have you been working on Lyndon Johnson?
Well, The Power Broker came out in '74. I think I started in '76. So I've been working 25 or 26 years.
The Power Broker was about what? Your first book?
Yeah, about Robert Moses, the man who built all the highways and parks. everything else in New York, basically.
And here's what it looks like. It's a huge book. Was this the biggest book you've ever written?
Yes, this one is close to it, though, you know, The Master of the Senate. That was about 1286. I forget, I was going to look.
It's 1167.
Thank you.
Your current book is 1167. Your first book on Lyndon Johnson was called what?
The Path to Power.
And what was it about?
Well, that was about Johnson's boyhood and his growing up in Johnson City, his creation of his first political machine, his going to college, his teaching Mexican-American children down in Catula, and, which is my favorite thing of all the Johnson books, a chapter called The First Campaign. So when Johnson is 28 years old, no one even knows who he is in his district, and he decides to run for Congress. And it's one of the most fascinating examples of a man who will exert any effort to win, and he does. And I tried to show through that campaign what is rural politics as opposed to big city politics.
And the second book came out in what year?
Came out in 1990.
And what's the time period for this?
Well, that deals with the 7 years, what I call Johnson's 7 years in the wilderness, where he's stuck in the House. He sees no way of getting to the Senate, of getting more power. He's just desperate. He starts to use his political influence, to sell his political influence, to make money through his radio station. It's a terribly unhappy time for him. And at the end, he decides to take what he calls the all-or-nothing gamble, to run against the most popular politician in the history of Texas, Governor Coke Stevenson, because he sees nothing else to do. I said without power, he didn't want to stay in Washington. And he didn't want to just be a member of the House because he didn't have any power there. And most of that book is really the story of a stolen election. In this, he didn't steal just thousands of votes, but tens of thousands of votes. And at the end, he won by 87 votes over Coke Stevens.
In about 17 or 18 minutes, we're going to open it up to phones for 2.5 hours, give you a chance to talk to Robert Caro, who is coming out with, right now as we speak, with this brand new book called Lyndon Johnson, Master of the Senate. This will be in your bookstores on April the 23rd, which means it's a few days left if you're watching this live before you can see it live. I mean, before you can buy the book. You dedicate most of your books for Ina, always,
yeah,
and for Robert Gottlieb, 30 years, 4 books, thanks. Who's Ina?
Ina is my wife, and of course she's the whole team. I mean, you know, when I read about other historians having teams of research assistants, Ina is a medieval historian. She has a master's in medieval literature, and I want to say she's also published one wonderful book, which is doing very well, and is just finishing another one on France now. But she also works as my researcher, and has for ever since The Power Broker.
Well, we've talked to you many times, but we've never seen Ina. So this time we took our cameras to New York, chatted with her a bit, and here is a little bit of what she had to say about how she does her work and this whole business of research. Robert Caro's wife.
I was working on my graduate thesis in medieval French history. And Bob hurt his back up at Harvard, and he couldn't get out of bed. So he asked me to go to I can't remember exactly what it was. He asked me to go to some records department in Long Island for the Moses book. And I would call him. I mean, I knew how to do primary sources, etc., but I didn't know how to do, the type of research that a reporter knows how to do, which is go to the primary sources in a municipal building and find out, according to the maps, who owned what, and go back and find out who sold it when, all of that. And I would have to run to the telephone like every 10 minutes and say, well, I found this, now what? And he would tell me the next thing to do. And it was just so much more fun than translating medieval Latin. I mean, I got to interview people and that were alive, and you could take the documents and ask them about it, which you can't do with medieval history. And we sort of been working ever since.
How long have you two been married?
43 years.
Children?
I have one son.
How old is he?
44.
What's he do for a living?
He's a lawyer.
Now, is it harder or easier, or do you know, having a research assistant who's also your wife?
Well, Ina is it's easier because Ina is a unique research assistant. I mean, I really, first place, I could never trust anybody else. You know, I always have to see everything myself. Even when she finds something, I always sort of have to see the file. But she knows what I'm looking for. And also, she has this, you know, it's a very ingenious, and it's a mind of great ingenuity, where she can think of where to look for other things. She's not, Ina is a little shy, so she doesn't like to do interviews, but if you put her down in a library, she's just happy. And I mean, she loves to go through documents.
Where'd you meet her?
I met her when I was at Princeton. I met her at a Hillel one Friday night at Princeton.
Bob Caro's a 1957 graduate of Princeton. We're going to show you where he works in a few minutes, and we're going to go to phones in about 14 minutes. And I want to ask the audience, and we've done this before because of the way he's writing these 4 books, to call in about anything but the Lyndon Johnson presidency. Lyndon Johnson was president November 1963 up through 1968, but that book is not written yet. How far along are you on the research?
Well, I've done a lot of the interviews for it because a lot of the people who I needed, like George Reedy, for example, or Horace Busby, I knew they were getting old and going to die. Actually, they did die. So I went through all their files of memos and meetings, and then I would do a lot of interviews with them. So that portion, I'm fairly well along in that, but there's an awful lot of work to do. And I also, you know, because I always go to I'm going to go to live in a southern city for as long as it takes for me to find out exactly what differences it made in the life of black people in the South that Lyndon Johnson got them voting rights.
Do you know where you're going to live yet?
No, I have to. It takes time to figure that out.
When do you think you'll do that?
Oh, I'm going to go on a book tour now. Then we're going to go. We always spend 2 months in France, and then I'm going to start.
And what about the idea, I know you've mentioned in the past, going to Vietnam?
Yes, well, you remember everything. That's the 2 things that I want to do, because if I can just say, I try to write about political power, and I feel that you don't write about it fully enough unless you write not only about the man who uses it, but about its effect on the people on whom it's used for good or for ill. Now, for good, Lyndon Johnson, through his great civil rights acts of his presidency and his voting rights acts, transformed the political power of black people in America. I want to go to a southern city and see, what did that mean? You have sewers now where you didn't have, are your sidewalks paved where they weren't paved before? How do you feel about the sheriff now that you can vote for a sheriff? Are your schools better? Did I say that already? Exactly what difference? Do you have more hope than your father did that your children's life will be better than yours because of Lyndon Johnson? However, the other side of Lyndon Johnson's presidency is Vietnam. And one of the things I intend to do is to try to show what it means when a modern industrialized nation makes war on, certainly not a primitive nation, but a rural peasant nation. So I want to go to Vietnam and see how that works, and probably live in one of these Vietnamese villages that were bombed by B-52s. You know, the horrible thing about that, Brian, is the B-52s flew so high that not only were they invisible from the ground, but you couldn't hear them. So these villages never even knew they were being bombed until the bombs actually hit.
When do you plan to do this?
Well, I haven't worked out. First, I'm going to do the southern city. Then, you know, you say, what priority do you have? Well, there are people in the Johnson administration they're all getting old. You know, I've interviewed some of them don't want to talk to me, but there are a lot who do that I'm not done with yet. In order to interview someone intelligently, you have to go through his file. So you can say, in this meeting you said so-and-so, what were you talking about? You have to do that. In the southern cities, the people who remember life before Lyndon Johnson, before the Voting Rights Act, they're getting old. So I feel this, and basically I'm getting old. So you feel this terrible sense of urgency. I'm going to do it as fast as I can.
How old are you?
66.
And you've been working on Lyndon Johnson for 25 or 26 years.
Yes.
How have you been able to make a living at this?
Well, with difficulty, but I mean, at first, you know, when we did The Power Broker, it was just 7 years of being broke. You know, I mean, I just remember The Power Broker of 7 years of worrying about how we were going to pay the rent every month. But then, of course, and that didn't really sell very much when it started. Now, of course, it's gone on. It's in all these colleges, so it sold a lot. But the first Johnson book became a bestseller. I think it was on the bestseller list for like half a year. The second one became the #1 bestseller in the country. How, I have no idea. I never thought it would. And it's now easier. I wouldn't say it's easy, because no matter how much money you may make on a book, when you divide it by 7 or 9 years, it doesn't come out to so much.
Do you do speaking to make money? Do you write articles to make money?
I never write. I've only written one article. When I left the newspaper business, I said, I'm going to try not to do anything but write books. So I left Newsday to do The Power Broker in 1967. So in those 34 years, I've only done one article. The New Yorker asked me to do one on the 25th anniversary of The Power Broker, how I came to write it. Now, people think that I'm doing magazine articles because, like, the New Yorker just excerpted Master of the Senate, and the New Yorker did 6 parts on Means of Ascent, and the Atlantic Monthly did 5 parts on The Path to Power. So I'm in the magazines a lot, but they're always excerpts from the books.
Power Brokers still sell?
Yes, I think it seems to sell more every year.
Thousands of copies a year?
Yes, it does. And I know at one point, Random House did a computer printout some years ago of how many colleges, you know, order each book, at least, I think, 50 copies of each book. And it was used in that amount, at least, in 231 colleges in the United States.
I want to show you a picture from your book. And first of all, I want to know whether this is Leland Olds. Has this story ever been told before?
No, it hasn't. It's an amazing. No, it hasn't.
Who was he?
Leland Olds was a reformer, a liberal, an idealist who Franklin Roosevelt made his New York State Power Commissioner, that he reformed the bringing of electricity to New York State. And when Roosevelt became president, he brought Leland Olds to Washington to try and regulate the oil and natural gas industries. He was the chairman of the Federal Power Commission, and in this book, Lyndon Johnson, because he's representing the oil men and the natural gas tycoons in Texas, sets out to and succeeds utterly in destroying Leland Olds.
How?
Well, I mean, basically by making not only calling him a communist. The great line in his speech is, do we want a commissioner or a commissar? Not the great line, but by persuading the other members of the Senate, many of whom knew Leland Olds, and almost all of whom admired and revered him for his idealism and his honesty and his unique grasp of public power in America, persuading them that back in the 1920s, the beginnings of the 1920s, he had been a communist because he worked for, he was a liberal, he was a radical. He was never a communist. In fact, when he tried to create a new political party in Michigan, he was the first guy to put in clauses that no communist could be a member of the party. But because Johnson used a lot of levers to do this, the key one was probably that he worked for a syndicate. It's called the Federated Press, which was like the Associated Press, and among its subscribers that took Olds' article was the Daily Worker. And Johnson succeeded in making the Senate believe, overwhelmingly, because he had a great ability to convince people of whatever he wanted, that in the 20s, because of this, Leland Olds had been a communist, and the Senate voted not to confirm him, and Olds' life was totally destroyed.
Can you remember how you first came onto that story?
Well, it's interesting. I started to read the hearings. You know, this has been treated in other Johnson biographies in really a cursory way, you know. I am not the first person to say that he, you know, used McCarthy tactics 3 years before McCarthy, you know, or 2 years before McCarthy. But when I started to read the hearings, which are well, I forget, perhaps 300 pages of how Johnson did it when he had Olds on the stand. I remember sitting there, I said, I've never read anything like this in my life. He is destroying this man. He's motivating the other senators, working them up, you know, the Homer Capeharts, these Republican reactionaries. I have this line in there, they took turns firing questions at him, 2 senators who were conservatives and 1 who was supposed to be a liberal, Lyndon Johnson. I read those hearings and I said, I'm not going to even think about this for about a week. I want to see if maybe I'm exaggerating the horror to me of what I am reading. Then I went back and read them again. I said, no, I'm going to tell this story. I was unable to tell it in more detail because you had to go back to Olds' entire life and his daughter, whom I really don't, if she's still alive, Zara Olds Chapin, Zarathustra he named it, Zarathustra Olds Chapin, helped me understand her father. Of course, he went back, as I do with everything, I went back, he went to Amherst, I learned about him in college, I learned about his early reforming efforts, which was sort of noble, you know, and I learned about, I mean, this was a unique man, so I tried to find all, you know, people would say to me, he inspired all the young staffers on the Federal Power Commission, you know, that they could do something, that they could regulate the utilities if they would only learn how to do this mathematically. So I found as many of them as I could, 4 or 5 of them, and they would explain to me how Olds did it. And of course, I talked to Johnson's people who were there at the time, who excused John Connolly and Horace Busby, Walter Jenkins, who of course attempted to persuade me that this wasn't really so bad, you know. At least one of them tried to persuade me that Leland Olds was a communist. In fact, 2 of them tried to persuade me that Leland Olds really was a communist. But unwittingly, as they gave me a lot of information on how Johnson worked to destroy this. I mean, no, it's a story that's never been, and I said, you know, people ask why my books take so long. I just said, I'm going to tell this story. And it did take a long time and a lot of pages to tell it.
Here's a picture of Congresswoman Helen Gahagan Douglas. The story about Helen Gahagan Douglas and her relationship with Lyndon Johnson, has it been told before? And if it has, how much new information did you have on this?
Oh, I tell it because, I mean, she had an affair with Lyndon Johnson. The significance of it to me was in that Johnson flaunted it. He showed it off. You know, I write in there how he took care to arrive at Capitol Hill every morning holding her hand. And
both of them were married at the time.
Yes. It's not, you know, Johnson had a lot of affairs. I don't consider Helen Gahagan Douglas, the affair with her, although she was a very famous woman, I don't consider that's very significant in his life except for the flaunting of it, because you couldn't write about Johnson's early days in the Senate or his last days in the House without, you want to describe how he arrived on Capitol Hill. He arrived on Capitol Hill holding her hand every morning. And they'd walk around Capitol Hill together. She was very, I think, attracted to him. The significant affair in Johnson's life, and there's only one, was an affair that had begun much earlier with Alice Glass, and which is described, I could not write, you know, The Power Broker, I managed to write 1,286 pages, or whatever you said it was. Although Robert Moses was considered one of the great ladies' man, the Lotharios of his time, and had affairs, you know, with very prominent women, and you could have had, you know, a lot of headlines in the book. I managed not to really go into his sex life at all, because it had nothing to do with his work. And but with Lyndon Johnson, you don't really have to talk about most of his affairs. They don't have a relationship to his public life. Alice Glass, that relationship did, because she was this very sophisticated hostess of a great estate in Virginia, who, when Johnson came to Washington as a 28-year-old congressman, she taught him how to dress. You know, she taught him what side of his face to use for photographers. But she also, and she was very beautiful, and this went on a very long time. The reason that you have to go into Alice Glass is that he also valued her political advice at times above anyone's. When he was out in Australia, if I can give you just one example, 1942, you're allowed one phone call. He has to decide whether he's going to run again for the House or run for the Senate in 1942. He's allowed one phone call. He doesn't make it to the White House. He makes it to Alice Glass. How do we know this? Because, and asks, which one should I run for? Because I found in the Johnson Library her telegram back to him. The exact words are in the book, but it's something to the effect, everyone else thinks you should run for the Senate, I think you should run for the House. And he runs for the House. You really can't tell his story without telling her story.
This is the new book, brand new, from Robert Caro. Be in your bookstores April 23rd, The Years of Lyndon Johnson, the Master of the Senate. And our phone lines are open. The numbers will be up there on that screen. You can begin dialing now, and we're going to go to calls for the next 2.5 hours. Robert Caro down this morning from New York City, where he lives. Born and raised and live on Central Park West?
Correct.
You still live there?
Yes. Well, we didn't live in New York, in Manhattan, for about 20 years. When I was a reporter on Newsday, we lived on Long Island. When I was doing the Power Broker, we were broke and lived up in Riverdale in an apartment, and then we moved to Texas. But in 1981, when we were able to move back to New York, Ina said, "Where do you want to live?" I said, "Basically, I only want to live on Central Park West."
Let's show some video as we take our first call of your office, which is on West 57th Street. You've had this office for how long?
I guess 15 years, because I'm just about to sign another lease.
There it is in the Fisk building, and you're how far away? Only several blocks away from your home.
Yes.
And you operate in this office alone. Here we are at the hallway,
yes,
leading up to your room. How many days a week do you work when you're writing?
Oh, every day.
7 days?
Yes.
This is it. This is your domain up there.
Oh, well, that's the office, yes.
What's on that bulletin board there on the left?
Well, on the bulletin board, which there's usually more papers than that, that's the outline of either the chapter I'm working on or at one point the entire book. That wall is like 24 feet long, and it was at one point covered top to bottom all the way across with the outline.
I know when we did this video of you were so absorbed in this you didn't even know we were shooting the video.
That's true. I'm looking to see what I look like when I write. I've never seen it before.
Do you write with that coat and tie on like that?
No, but I wear a coat and tie to work, and I generally work, I guess, in a shirt and a tie and a sweater, you know.
And what kind of typing would you call that right there? Is it?
I'm embarrassed, I guess I would call it, but it's very fast. I can do that very fast.
What kind of typewriter is that?
It's a Smith Corona Electra 210. I've used them ever since I started writing my books, and they stopped making them. My goodness, I didn't know you were doing this.
How close? How many do you have left? I know you had 17 at one time.
Well, at this moment I have 17 because they stopped making them so many years ago that whenever a part breaks, you have to cannibalize another machine, you know, and you also have to keep a couple down at the Johnson Library and a couple in Washington and all. So the number keeps going down. Then I advertise or ask friends or something, and I build the number up again.
Let's grab a phone call for Robert Caro. We go to Tampa, Florida. First up, go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. This is Dean Chambers calling. My question to you, sir, is...
Could we turn this a little louder?
Right down there,
I'm
Robert.
sorry.
Yes, there you go.
Excuse
Go
me.
ahead, sir.
Yes, sir. My question to you is, as you were talking about the hearings and as far as looking in the paperwork regarding Lyndon Johnson literally destroying that man as far as, the McCarthy tactics, my question to you, sir, is when you're doing your research and looking into the Lyndon B. Johnson era, do you find that there's still a lot of paperwork, maybe under the Freedom of Information Act, that you can't get, or is there quite a bit of access, or what stages, do you find yourself coming up against walls as far as getting access to actual documentation regarding Lyndon B. Johnson?
Well, you have... There are vast sources of, it's a good question. There are vast sources of paper in the Lyndon Johnson Library. I think the last time they put out a press release, they said they had 34 million separate papers there. On the Senate period, it's very well documented. You have inter-office memos. You have the memos from other senators. You have secretary's notes saying Senator Russell called. He says he'll do this if you'll do that. So you have a lot of that information. Now down in Washington, I also did a lot in the National Archives to see the internal records of the Senate committees.
Here's a photograph from the book, Richard Brevard Russell Jr. being sworn in as governor of Georgia by the Chief Justice of the Georgia Supreme Court, Richard Brevard Russell Sr., June 27th, 1931. Next call, Newport News, Virginia, for Robert Caro. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Caro. My name is Matt Hale. I'm from Newport News. I'm a great fan of yours. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I wonder if you could tell me what was the relationship between LBJ and J. Edgar Hoover? Does this come up in your book, or will it come up in your next book?
That will come up in my next. That will come up in my next book. So I'm not going to go into it in too much depth in answer to your question right now, except to say they live diagonally across the street from each other on 30th Place in Washington.
Here's a photograph from 1948. The Johnsons at home. That's Linda Bird there and Lucy Baines there with their mother and father. Mrs. Johnson is still alive. Do you know how old she is?
Well, she was born in December 1912, so I'm bad at math. I think it's 89.
And when was the last time you talked to her?
Oh, I haven't talked to her since long before the first book was published.
New York City, go ahead, please.
Mr. Caro, thank you very much.
Yes.
I know how you feel about living in Manhattan. I'm over on West End Avenue. No other place like it.
Oh.
But my question concerns the power broker
Yes.
and Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority.
Yes.
You know, New York City is one of the few places where there's an intra-borough toll, like the Rockaways and even Manhattan, Bronx, and Queens. Because there was, obviously corruption in putting Triborough together, would there be any way to look at that transaction to see if maybe the city could take it back, like we're trying to take back the public school system? And any other comments you have on Robert Moses, who,
Well, you'll have a lot of trouble trying to take it back, because Robert Moses was a genius in legislation. And the genius that applies to your question is that when he created the bond covenants, when you finance the Triborough Bridge by selling bonds to individuals and banks, and accompanying each bond is a bond covenant, and Johnson would make sure that that covenant was embodied in the legislation establishing the authority, because the Constitution says that in effect it says no state, but it means no state or no federal government or no city can abridge the obligations of a contract. So those contracts basically say that the authority can be kept in existence as long as the authority wants to be in existence.
How long did Robert Moses have the power?
Robert Moses held power in New York, and it was more power than any mayor or governor had, or even mayor or governor combined. He had it for almost half a century, for 44 years.
Hendersonville, North Carolina, you're on the air. Hendersonville, are you there? Go ahead, please.
This is my name is Alan Smith.
Yes, Mr. Smith.
I'm wondering if Mr. Caro has had the opportunity to compare the number of votes that were stolen by Lyndon Johnson in the Johnson-Stevenson election with those that were stolen by Mr. Stevenson.
Yes, I did. I went into that in great detail.
Did he? How many did Mr. Stevenson?
Well, Mr. Stevenson, the Johnson loyalists put out the argument that Stevenson also stole votes, and in Texas politics at the time, I'm sure that some votes were stolen by Stevenson's people. But I thought that the definitive word on this was spoken to me by a man who was Lyndon Johnson's lawyer for about 25 years, and also the man who ran Texas for him. His name was Edward A. Clark, and he was a figure of such power that he was once named the secret boss of Texas. And he and I became great friends. When he died, the Texas Monthly wrote a piece on him saying he seems to have spent the last 5 years of his life explaining how votes were stolen in Texas to Robert Caro. He once said to me, as far as Stevenson himself was concerned, he didn't steal that many because he didn't know how.
Here's a picture of George Reedy, one of the long-term aides of Lyndon Johnson and Dorothy Nichols.
Right.
George Reedy died just not too long ago.
Yes.
How important was he to you as a source?
Very important to me. You know, in the Senate period, Brian, he would accompany Johnson around the Senate a lot of the time. Of course, wrote his press releases. Was a very acute political observer, and I first started interviewing him many years ago. I'd go out to Milwaukee, and we'd have long dinners in the German-American Rathskellers there over these huge plates of sauerkraut, you know, Schukrut and all. It was sort of touching because he had left Washington, and he once said, you know, I once apologized for taking so much of his time, and he said to me, you know, I really love to tell you these stories. No one else out here even knows who these people are that we're talking about. Then he went into a nursing home, and we would talk on the telephone. He had a private room there, and one day when I called, there was no answer. I didn't think anything about it that night or the next night, because sometimes he was out of the room for a meal or something, but then on the Monday after, I read his obituary.
Topeka, Kansas, for Robert Caro. You're on the air.
I'm Randy Williams, and it's a great honor to talk with you, Mr. Caro.
Thanks.
I must say I'm in awe of the work you did on The Path to Power. I've read it several times. I think it's an extraordinary work.
Thank you very much.
I think you caught the young Lyndon Johnson exactly as he showed up in the Senate. Stealing elections. You found the boy and it turned him into the man.
Well, in many respects, you know, he was the same. However, in some respects, he wasn't. And in this volume, we see that while as he's rising to power in the Senate, in many ways, he's sort of the same. When he gets power, you know, one of the things I say, we all know Lord Acton's axiom, all power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, I'm not sure that's always correct, but what I believe is always correct is that power always reveals, because when you get power, you can do what you want, and you do begin to see what's underneath. And of course, what Lyndon Johnson does in this book, when he gets power in 1957, is to set out to pass liberal legislation, and in particular, and most dramatically, as I said before, this first civil rights bill since Reconstruction.
Here is Lyndon Johnson with Sam Ervin, senator from North Carolina. Herman Talmadge, who just died, was former governor and senator from the state of Georgia. Alan Bible, if I remember right, from Nevada.
Yes. Can I tell you something about the Herman Talmadge interview? I had been trying to get to talk to Senator Talmadge for a long time, and finally his wife said he had been in the hospital in intensive care, so I went down to see him. It's the kind of thing that, you know, really casts some new light on the Senate, because he was a member of the Southern Caucus, which was this very powerful block of 22 Southern senators that Russell headed. And one of the things that I really wasn't happy about was I knew the decisions of the Southern Caucus, but I wasn't really happy about the interplay, what happened in meetings of the Southern Caucus, how Lyndon Johnson persuaded them to go along with a form of civil rights in 1957. And you fly to Atlanta, you drive down, as I remember, on Herman Talmadge Highway. He lives in I think, Henry County in the center of Georgia. So you drive down on Herman Talmadge Highway to the exit marked Herman Talmadge Boulevard, then you follow the signs to Lake Talmadge. And there was this very old, very sick, he had congestive heart failure. It's a very painful interview because he almost had to gather his breath to give me each answer. The answers are sort of cryptic, you know. I mean, cryptic is the wrong word, they're brief. But he always managed to make me know what he wanted to say. But you never forgot that you were talking to one of the last of the true unapologetic segregationists. I mean, he's there, and behind him is my memory, anyway, in the same room, is a large painted portrait of his brother, his father, who was governor. You know, the Talmadges held power in Georgia for, almost half a century between the two of them. Whipping Gene Talmadge, I think that comes from his expression. I was never actually a member of the Klan, but I used to do a lot of whipping myself. So as this man Herman Talmadge is really expressing the segregationist viewpoint in the 50s, you really said, God, this way, you had a feeling of the depth of it in the South.
McLean, Virginia. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Robert Liner, McLean, Virginia.
Yes, Mr. Liner.
I often recount with proper attribution your wonderful story of the meeting between Lyndon Johnson and Herman Brown in that hotel where they're about to try to get back into the Senate race, culminating in the question of Lyndon Johnson, where's Abe? I just wondered if you could recount that, because I'd like to hear it in your own words. And if you can't, because it is a little long, I wonder if you could give us a comment on any other information about that meeting.
Well, the "Where is Abe" comment is a wonderful comment. I'm really glad that you remember that. Abe, of course, is Abe Fortas, who later became a Supreme Court justice. But in the time we're talking about, he's one of Johnson's many lawyers. When Johnson is attempting to steal this election, his opponent, Coke Stevenson, has launched certain legal maneuvers to stop the stealing. Can't remember them at the moment. But Johnson has convened 10 or 12 of the best lawyers in Texas in this hotel room as I recall, it's Fort Worth. And none of them know what to do. One of the things about Lyndon Johnson that makes him a leader of men was that however hysterical or excitable he would be at other times, when it came down to a moment where you had to know what to do, he knew what to do and made the decision. And as he looked at this room of lawyers that were all trying to compromise, and every compromise he would wind up losing, he said, where's Abe? As it happened, Fortas was in either Dallas or Fort Worth. He came over, and one of the other lawyers in the room, L.E. Jones, said, that's the difference between good lawyers like us and a great lawyer. Fortas sat there, he listened to us for about 1 hour, and then he said, all you have to do is this. And he wrote out, or he actually had L.E. Jones write out this one-page brief, which in effect saved the election for Lyndon Johnson.
For Robert Caro, Atlanta, you're next. Hello, Atlanta, you're on the air. Go ahead, please. Hi.
Hello?
Hi.
Hello, Bob. This is Bill Jordan calling from Atlanta.
Bill Jordan, who is the man who drove me down to see Herman Talmadge and also took me to Winder.
Bob, I see where you're going to Vietnam. I want to volunteer to go with you. I'll stay over there with you for 3 months. I'll introduce you to Vietnam just like I did to Lovejoy and to Winder. Will you let me go with you?
Well, I'll let you. I'd be happy to have your company. If I can just take this opportunity to say, Bill, I've sent you the books just came out. And you'll see that what I've said to you in the acknowledgments, which is that I really appreciated your help because I felt you knew that my view of Senator Russell would not always be the same as yours, that in the view for segregation it would be really very different. But I felt that you were so determined to help me get this man, this towering figure in American history, right, that you never stopped helping me. And that is a kind of integrity that I really appreciate. I think it's sort of inspirational for me. Thanks.
I'm anxious that you got Russell right. I haven't read it, but I'll let you know when I finish.
Okay.
Lake Travis, Texas. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Good morning. I've already pre-ordered Master of the Senate through Amazon.com, and I had just received my copy of book notes, so my hat's off to both Mr. Lamb and Mr. Caro. I'm a stone's throw from Mansfield Dam.
Yes.
And the wonderful description of the hill country and the history of the hill country on the Path of Power is just one of the most elegant things that I've read. It reminds me of Shelby Foote as far as the elegance of your writing.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you a question. This concerns LBJ's relationship sitting at the feet of people like FDR and then Sam, the daddy relationship that he had as part of his way to gain power.
Yes.
I'm not sure whether Rayburn was still Speaker of the House when Johnson moved into the Senate. But would you touch on the bridge of their relationship as Johnson became a senator, and then also, if it relates to that, speak just briefly on his relationships to both Barry Goldwater and Everett Dirksen? I think that might be fun to talk about.
Can I take a pass on Dirksen and Goldwater for the reason that Brian said I'm going to write about them at real length in the next volume? But on Rayburn, I'm really happy to talk, because you can't tell the story of Lyndon Johnson's life without telling the story of Rayburn. You know, Rayburn loved Johnson. He was he's one of these figures. He was Speaker, now it's gone out of my mind, either 25 or 27 years, about a quarter of a century. And he ruled the House of Representatives as basically no one has ruled it before or since. And I mean, many of the New Deal laws that we, ascribe only to the Roosevelt administration, well, they were formed by the Roosevelt administration, but it hadn't been for Rayburn's iron hand getting it through the House of Representatives, getting this legislation through, these laws would not have become the law of the land. He was a very lonely man. He never opened up to anybody. But Johnson, who had an entree to him because his father had known Sam Rayburn in the Texas legislature, when he came to Washington as a congressional assistant with his wife Lady Bird, they started inviting Mr. Sam, as he was called, over to their little apartment for Sunday breakfast. And really it was Lady Bird who was a wonderfully gracious person, as we all know, who made Mr. Rayburn, I don't want to go on too long here, I could tell this Rayburn, I'm going to try and edit it down. Now you see why my books are so long. She made him feel at home, so he started to come. I wrote, this man who never visited other people's homes regularly started to come regularly for Sunday breakfast, and she'd make him his favorite peach ice cream and the kind of spicy chili he liked. And he and Lyndon would sit around and read the Sunday papers. There is a point when Johnson is very young and Lady Bird is back in Texas, where Johnson gets pneumonia. I think the year is 1934, and of course pneumonia was very serious then. Rayburn comes to the hospital in Washington and sits in a straight chair beside Lyndon Johnson's bed all night. Now Rayburn was a chain smoker, and he was so afraid that he might wake Lyndon Johnson if he got up to brush the cigarette ashes off his vest, that when Johnson woke up in the morning, Rayburn's vest was covered with cigarette ashes. When Johnson, in this book, Rayburn, of course, plays this crucial role in lifting Johnson to power, which I describe in the first two books. And in this book, he's almost as important as ever, because you say, what's the epigraph of this book? I like to write about political power. The epigraph, the little thing at the front of the book, is a saying not by me, but by Lyndon Johnson. He says, whatever else they say about me, I understand power. I know where to look for it, I know where to find it, and I know how to use it. One of the places he looked for it was to get power over the Senate, was not in the Senate, but at the other end of the Capitol in the House of Representatives, because what's the basic thing which was this genius in power realizes? A senator may get his bill through the Senate, bill he has to have passed, but it's not going to be a law unless it's also passed in the House. The only member of the Senate who has this kind of entree to Sam Rayburn is Lyndon Johnson. So senators had to come to Johnson to ask him to go to Rayburn, and that was a favor Johnson did for them if he wanted to, and he used it to exact power from them, exact favor from them in return.
Here's a picture in The Path to Power of Lyndon Johnson kissing his father.
Oh, right.
Princeton, West Virginia, you're on the air.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Caro, it's truly a privilege to be able to hear you this morning.
Thank you.
I was only 13 when your first book came out, and I became fascinated with Lyndon Johnson at that time. When your second book came out, I was in college, and I didn't do that well that semester because I kept reading it over and over.
Sorry.
That's okay. I truly enjoyed them. I'm looking forward to the third one. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how Johnson's personal relationships with senators played a role in his ascendancy to power, and whether or not we've seen that dynamic at all since Lyndon Johnson. I believe it's unparalleled, but certainly you're the expert, and I would like to hear your opinion about it.
Well,
Before you start, just let me show
Sure.
a picture here of, you're talking about relationship, Robert Kerr, Senator from Oklahoma, and Senator Clinton Anderson from New Mexico.
That's actually a very significant picture in relation to what this gentleman just asked, and thanks for your nice words. You see how Senator Kerr is holding up a finger there, so that he's the center of attention in that photograph. When Johnson was in the House of Representatives, one of the things he was known for was pushing himself into the center of every photograph, so he'd be the center. He gets to the Senate and he realizes that isn't going to work in the Senate. So this is actually on the, I may be wrong, I think it's the first day of the Senate, or the day that, at any rate, that they select their seat assignments. He's posing there with Bob Kerr and Clinton Anderson, two other freshman senators, and he lets Kerr be the center of attention. And that is a key to the way Johnson rose to power in the Senate.
New York City, go ahead, please.
Yes, hello, Mr. Caro. I enjoy your work very much.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, I've been reading the second excerpt in the New Yorker titled The Compassion of Lyndon Johnson.
Yes.
And it goes into great detail about Johnson's interest in civil rights, but also his use of, frankly, racist language and racist views.
Yes.
And it seems that you've done a very good job, I think, of highlighting one against the other and how they can possibly come together. And I wonder if you could go into a little bit more about that. I mean, he uses some tough language, which I understand is pretty routine at that time. But how do you reconcile the two? How did he reconcile the two sides of it?
Well, that's a really good question, and I'll try to give you a rather short answer to it and say that it's such a complicated question that it really takes a couple of 100 pages in the book to deal with it. Let's talk about it in terms of compassion and ambition. I'll try and just abbreviate this. Lyndon Johnson had a true compassion. He always wanted to help poor people. He always wanted to help poor people of color especially. And how do we know it's true? I'll tell you how I know it's true. It's been said in a lot of biographies, and it's absolutely true, that when he was 21 and he needed to make money to stay in college, he taught for a year at the Mexican school, that was in quotes, in a little town called Cotulla, Texas. And I wrote, no teacher had ever cared, no Anglo teacher had ever cared if these kids learned or not. This teacher cared. And a lot of biographies have documented how hard he worked to make them care. But there's something else that I felt was the proof of the truth or of the genuineness of this feeling. Because when he was done, he would take the janitor of the school before and after school each day and sit with him. His name was Tomas, I guess, Coronado, on the steps of the school. He bought him a book and taught him English. Coronado says something like, the exact quote is in Master of the Senate, says like, I would spell a word and pronounce. Johnson would repeat. I would pronounce again. Johnson would repeat. That was a man who really wanted to help. On the other side, he was a very cruel man. There was, you know, with Johnson, you are talking about opposites. It's why it's really hard to do it, except to lay it out in a book. And I have a line in there which says that these opposites were no less strong because they were opposite. There's the compassion and there's the cruelty. He liked to hurt. And of course, if you're dealing with a black man, for example, probably the easiest way to hurt him is to use some phrase like nigger, which refers to the color of his skin, or boy. And I do have in this book very graphic and dramatic examples of how he liked to hurt. Now,
what's the story of hurting Robert Parker?
Well, that's quite a story. This is not, I have to say, I didn't research this. It's in Mr. Parker's own book. He later became the maitre d' of the Senate, but he worked for Johnson as a patronage employee in the 40s and 50s, and sometimes filled in as his chauffeur. And Johnson once, I'm not going to get this exactly right, Johnson once leaned over, and Parker would talk about how When Johnson died, he was filled with this mixed feelings because he said, Johnson got freedom for me and for my people that we would never had before besides him. He said, on the other hand, I could never forget the way he would hurt me. That's not his exact words, it's my paraphrase. And he recounts this one example in particular. He said Johnson would always call me, if I was 5 minutes late, he'd call me a lazy, no-good nigger, that kind of thing. But he said once in his car, while Johnson's in the back seat and Parker's in the front, Mr. Parker relates in his book, Johnson leans over the front seat and shouts and says to him, "Tell me something, Chief. Does it bother you that no one ever calls you by your name? They always call you boy or chief." And Mr. Parker says, "Well, yes, sir, it does bother me because my name is Robert Parker." And Johnson leans over the front seat and smacks his newspaper down and he says something to the effect, "Listen, boy, nobody's ever going to call you by your name as long as you live because you're black." He says, "You just got to learn to sit there like a piece of furniture and let it slide off you." Now, Johnson was using that, I feel. Mr. Parker doesn't feel, but I think I feel. To give Mr. Parker a lesson that Lyndon Johnson felt everybody had to learn. Lyndon Johnson was a great pragmatist and a great realist. What he was really saying, because he saw that Mr. Parker was ambitious, as he was ambitious. He rose in the Senate to become maitre d' at the dining room. He's saying, you've got to ignore this. Just accept it as part of life. That's the only way you're going to get ahead. But Johnson's, some of the things that Johnson did really are cruel.
This is Robert Caro's new book called Master of the Senate. He'll be with us for another 2 hours. This book will be in your bookstores April the 23rd. How many copies first printing?
200,000.
How many copies did you have Means to Ascent, the first printing?
I don't remember, but it was a lot also.
I mean, are you comfortable this is enough to get started with?
I'm less comfortable that they're going to sell it. You know, that's a lot of books.
Inside is this photograph, by the way, of the Southern Caucus sitting around the table. These are the senators that made up the 22 senators of the 11 southern states. You can see some familiar faces. This is Richard Russell here, Herman Talmadge, John Stennis, Alan Ellender over on this side from Louisiana, Sam Ervin, John Sparkman from Kentucky, and this is Strom Thurmond when he was a Democrat.
Yes.
From South Carolina, and this is James Eastland. This man right here with his back to us is the father of Pat Robertson. His name was Willis A. Robertson of Virginia. Next call, Alexandria. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Caro. I've been waiting 7 or 8 years for this. I listened to both of your previous books on tape.
Yes, sir.
And I hope you don't cut me off, and I apologize, I'm on speakerphone, but my hands are crippled. First of all, how does one reach you to perhaps provide source material for the next book?
Best place to reach me is to look me up in the New York phone book. It's 91 Central Park West.
Okay, good. I'll do that. Now,
Okay.
the next thing is I'm going to run off a few things. First of all, Laundry Day in Texas was a wonderful, wonderful
Thank you very much.
description. And
Thank you.
I only can think of one other. Are you familiar with Larry McMurtry?
Oh, sure. It's wonderful.
met him?
Wonderful. Yes, I have met him. He's a wonderful writer.
You've inspired me to read all of his books. The way he describes the history of Texas.
Yes, he's wonderful at that.
Second of all, and I have about three brief ones. What's your relationship with Chuck and Linda Robb?
I don't have a relationship with Chuck and Linda Robb.
Sorry to hear that, but I understand why. What's the third question? Is the Power Broker on tape?
Yes, it is on a lot of tapes. It's unabridged, and it's on a lot of tapes, but it is on tape, yes.
Next, and only two more questions. Next question is, when will the new book be on tape? Simultaneously?
Oh, sort of simultaneously.
Yeah, we've had it here. I've already listened to it on tape. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'll have my local library, the best library in the world, Fairfax County Public Library, get it.
Okay.
I'd like you to talk about Johnson's lesson in stealing elections from his first loss to pass the biscuits Pappy? And the last question is, what is Brown and Root now? What company is it now? What did it evolve into? And thank you very much, Brian, and you.
Thanks for your call, sir.
Brown and Root, if I'm correct, was bought by Halliburton. That was some years ago, and as far I don't really know.
That's the company that Dick Cheney ran. Haliburton.
Yes. I don't really know the recent things about Brown and Root. Your other question was terrific. It was about, I was asked before about Johnson stealing the 48 election. In 41, he had one stolen from him because he made this mistake. He was running against this hillbilly singing former flour salesman from Texas, Pass the Biscuits, Pappy O'Daniel. And on election day, they were both stealing votes as fast as they could, but Johnson made this mistake. He forgot this basic rule of Texas politics. You never report your final totals until the other person has reported his final totals, because otherwise he knows how many votes you have to steal to win. Johnson is so confident, and he thinks he's won, that early in the afternoon of this day, he allows his final votes to be reported. Actually, I was never sure if he allowed it or if John Connally, his chief aide, made the mistake of doing it. I know when John Connally started to tell me about it, he said, I remember I cried that day. If you knew John Connally, it was really hard to imagine him crying. So
John Connally didn't talk to you for the first book, and he talked to you at what point then?
Well, after he refused to talk to me for the first book, refused to answer my letters or phone calls. Sometime after the second book came out, he telephoned me. I'm trying to remember this. Well, I remember what he said. I don't remember if he said he'd read the whole first book, he'd read or something, and he said, you got him right on the head. He says, I don't want you to do the second volume without talking. You wouldn't talk to me for the first volume. I resisted, saying, I tried so hard to, you never called me back. I didn't say that. And so I went down to his ranch in Floresville for 3 days of really remarkable interviews. I mean, they went from morning till night. It was just the two of us. And he would wake me up early in the morning, in my memory about 5:30 or 6. Anyway, it was too early in the morning. And we'd go and sit on a fence where they were training his quarter horses then. He was then in the full flush of his financial success. And there was nothing he refused to answer for me. I don't think there was a question that he wouldn't answer for me. He was a guy of unique political brilliance. I mean, that second Senate campaign, which he so largely ran for Johnson against Coke Stevenson, when he was explaining to me, I mean, just to take one moment here, he says, got to understand, Bob, this was the old politics against the new. This was the birth of media politics. Now, the old Coke Stevenson was the most popular governor in the history of Texas. The last time he had run, he carried every one of the 254 counties in Texas, the only candidate in history who had ever done that. Johnson destroyed him. He was a legend in Texas. He was called the cowboy governor. He was a very poor boy. He had built up this great ranch. Very conservative man. But very honest and beloved in Texas. Johnson destroyed him. He persuaded Texas of things about Coke Stevenson that were totally untrue. Connally would say, you don't understand, Bob. It's repetition. It's repetition. If you got enough, and I'm now paraphrasing the exact quote is in Connally's exact quote is in the book. If you have enough money, you can take enough ads, you can repeat things enough so people will believe anything. Then I would say, well, Johnson said Coke Stevenson supported Taft-Hartley or whatever. Coke Stevenson made a speech and said, I've never supported Taft-Hartley or whatever. I said, why didn't that work since he was so beloved? And Connally said, you don't understand. I told you, Bob. Repetition. Repetition is what did it, and we understand it, and Lyndon Johnson understood it. Johnson was a genius. I mean, he was doing multiple polling. I mean, it's not true that no one had done polls in Texas before. People had done polls before. Johnson said, I want polls by I forget, 4 or 5 different organizations. I want the questions of different shades of opinion. I don't want to just know who they're for. I want to know what's motivating them. So, you know, so you have on the one hand, and this is what I tried to show in that book, the old politics. Coke Stevenson campaigning as he had campaigned so many times before. You know, he was the only man in the history of the state who had ever held, he was Speaker of the Texas House of Representatives. He was Lieutenant Governor. He was Governor. He had never lost an election, certainly, you know. And he always won by so much. And he always campaigned the same way. And he thought he was going to campaign the same way against Lyndon Johnson, which was simply driving from town to town. You get to the courthouse square, someone would have been there with a bullhorn saying, Coke Stevenson is here to speak. You'd speak to this little audience, you'd walk through the courthouse and the stores, you'd shake hands, you'd get back into the car and drive to the next place. Lyndon Johnson is using the new media politics. It's not television, then it's radio. And among the things, if I could just, so I don't go on forever, among the tactics that Johnson used and could use, because he had all the money he needed through Herman Brown, was he would buy, farmers come in to eat lunch about 11:30 or noon, right? So they're always at the kitchen table at noon with their wife, and the radio is always on. And Johnson would buy the noon to 1 hour on every radio station that came into a certain area of Texas. So you couldn't turn on the radio station without hearing him.
San Diego, go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm so happy to talk to Mr. Caro. I've enjoyed you so much.
Thank you.
You are brilliant. Brilliant. I have a question about comparing 2 very famous Democratic people is Mr. Smith of New York, which I know you have a lot of knowledge of, and Mr. Johnson of Texas. One seems like a snake oil salesman by your description, and the other is, to me, one of the noblest men that ever walked the planet. Can you really tell me what you feel about the difference between these 2 gentlemen? And I will take my answer off the air, and thank you for C-SPAN. I really appreciate the program. Thanks.
You. Which Smith is she talking about?
Al Smith, the governor of New York in the 1920s, the first Catholic governor of New York, ran for president in 1928.
We have a picture here from the Moses book, and Al Smith, I believe, is that him right there?
Yes.
Herb Lehman,
yes.
Al Smith,
and August Heckscher.
August Heckscher. And his son, Augie Heckscher, wrote the book on Woodrow Wilson. We had it on the show. Okay, go ahead.
You have everyone on the show. That's a good book, so of course he would be on your show. Al, you know, can I answer this question in a way? This isn't quite what you asked, but it'll answer it. One of the reasons I wanted to write about Lyndon Johnson, you know, things change, was I thought he was like Al Smith. When I was doing The Power Broker, and no one has written, at that time there was no good biography of Smith. Now there's one biography, but it doesn't really, well, doesn't really capture what a great speaker he was. And all the time I was doing The Power Broker, I realized, I wished I had enough time to do a biography of Al Smith, because he was a populist. He came from immense poverty, very poorly educated. He didn't go to school past the 6th grade. He was a ruthless politician, a Tammany politician, but as soon as he got the power, it became evident that what he wanted to do was just help his people. He used to say, it's us, it's we against them, it's us. The votes are down here with us. They're not up on the east side, they're down here in the 4th Ward. My image of Lyndon Johnson before I started looking into these books was sort of the same. Smith was a populist, Johnson was a populist, both incredibly poor, both very badly educated. Johnson went to college, but it's a college that really we would consider a high school today. Both ruthless politicians in their early career, but both did things for poor people in their later career. So I thought there was a real relationship, a real similarity between the 2 of them, which of course, if you've read my books, you know I don't feel anymore.
Here's a picture of Lyndon Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, former President Kennedy, Lucy Baines Johnson, and Linda Bird Johnson Robb. You said earlier you had no relationship with Linda Bird and Chuck Robb. Have you ever spoken at the LBJ Library yet?
No, I would like to say I was never invited, but I have to alter that now. The director of the library, Harry Middleton, for the 19 years that I had been working there, never invited me. About a month before he left, he suddenly said he'd sure like to have me come down and speak there. I thought I'd wait. He's now retired. I said I thought I'd sort of wait for the next administration.
But if they invite you, would you go to the library?
Yeah, I probably would. I want to see how the new administration of the library differs from the old one.
Have they sold your books at the library by now?
Well, for many years they wouldn't sell my books at the library. Then the Philadelphia Inquirer, as I recall, a reporter I think named Jay Romano went down and said, "These is the only biographies that are not there." Then they hastily put them in, then after a few years they stopped again, then someone else came down and so it's an off and on thing. Yeah.
One last question, I'll take another call. You
Sure.
say, and I don't have it in front of me, Lyndon Johnson was the greatest senator in history? Greatest
majority leader.
Greatest majority leader in history. And there's been a majority leader since what year?
Well, that is a question, Brian, which I have to say is impossible to answer, because newspapers started using the word leader with different meanings, a great leader. The formal institution of majority leader, it's different from each from party leader, and if your party's in the majority, it's majority leader. It's different for each party, but it's about in the 1930s. For the Democrats, we consider the first one as a man named Kern, who was during Woodrow Wilson's time.
We're going to talk a little bit about Hubert Humphrey in a moment, and even run some audio tape from a conversation that he had with Lyndon Johnson. But before that, we go to Davis, California. You're on the air.
Hi, this is Joel Deckler in Davis, California. However, for the first 40 years of my life, I grew up in New York City, and just two brief comments. I was friendly with a guy you went to high school with, Mike Gross. I believe you were the editor of your Horace Mann High School newspaper.
Yes, I certainly remember Mike. Terrific basketball player.
Right. The other thing is, I read The Power Broker years ago, about 18 years ago, and towards the end, when groups started standing up against Moses, there was one Jewish group that protested, and the Times had this great headline. It said, "Jews protest Moses," which was kind of ironic. But my question is, recently there's been a spate of plagiarism amongst some popular historians. I won't mention any names, but one is actually a biographer of Lyndon Johnson. Our local newspaper, the Sacramento Bee, carried an op-ed piece by some historian who complained about these people not being forthcoming and saying, "You're right, I got caught, I was wrong," and the author said somebody like Robert Caro would never do something like that. I was wondering what your comment is upon about the spate of plagiarism by some popular historians, and what it says about either the publishing industry or morality amongst certain types of authors.
Well, I'm going to answer it in this way. If there's anything I've learned from my own books, it's not to think you know anything until you've looked into it for yourself. And I haven't looked into these allegations of plagiarism, so I don't know, and I really don't know if they're isolated, inadvertent instances, or if there's something more serious than that. And since I haven't, I'm not going to comment on any specific historian, including the ones who have been named in the newspapers recently. I will say that, of course, without reference to that, in my view, plagiarism is an unacceptable thing, because if you're a writer, what you live by are your words, and your words had better be your own. And if you have to use someone else's words, they better be in quotes. I mean, I'll just take this opportunity, because he never gets thanked enough for his work on Lyndon Johnson, to mention the name, because I quote him, because there's a little phrase he uses about Lyndon Johnson, which was so wonderful. I said, I can't make it any better than this. So I better just quote him. So his name is Ronnie Duggar. He was the editor of the Texas Observer, a great liberal journalist. And he speaks in relation to Johnson's helping of black Americans. He speaks of his, quote, real but expendable compassion, close quote. And of course, when you put that in your book, you put it in quotes.
Audience might be interested, if you're watching this live next Saturday morning at 9 o'clock on C-SPAN 2, Robert Caro, Doris Kearns Goodwin, and Nell Irvin Painter, another Princetonian, will be appearing before a group of historians in this town, 300 of them, over here at one of the hotels. We will carry this live, and you'll hear a discussion about all three writers, how they write, where they write, when they write, and Mr. Caro will be there at that time. And that's the way it's scheduled as of right now. Doris Kearns Goodwin, Nell Irvin Painter, and Robert Caro. We go to Pleasantville, New York. You're on the air.
Oh, good afternoon. What an honor to speak to Mr. Caro, one of the greatest writers of modern times, and certainly Mr. Lamb, one of the best interviewers on television.
Well, the second half of that is true.
Mr. Caro, I did a couple of things. First of all, I took the paperback version of your book up to my bathroom scale. It weighs almost 5 pounds. Almost 5 pounds. I probably never would have read it in that form. You should promote the fact that all of your books are available on tape. What a wonderful way to listen to them. I read all of them. And The Power Broker was the first. I had the privilege of listening to that book 2 summers ago as I was commuting to Long Island on a regular basis, driving over those bridges. And they just really came alive. In Jones Beach, my country club, growing up as a kid, I can't wait to go back there and see it again.
Thanks.
The previous caller, one of the previous callers talked about Al Smith.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about Al Smith's story, how he became an assemblyman, how hard he worked, a little bit about Bell Moskowitz, and maybe about how FDR used him and took all of his programs and ideas and put them into the New Deal?
Well, I'll start with the end of your question. Francis Perkins, Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor, once said, 95% of everything in the New Deal we took from Al Smith in New York. He's one of the great social reformers in American history, and the fact that he's almost forgotten to history is one of the saddest things that I've ever heard. He was the great speaker, He had an answer for everything. They used to attack him or mention that he had no education. He said, I have a degree, FFM, for the Fulton Fish Market, because that's how he worked when he was a boy to keep his family together. He would work there from something like 4 in the morning till into the evening every day, rolling these heavy barrels of fish up and down. Someone once chided him on his lack of grammar. He said, I know grammar. When a pluperfect adjective precedes a noun, insert a plus. But he really cared. He rose to power, running errands, doing jobs for Tammany Hall. Then they make him an assemblyman, and they have the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire in New York, when all these the women who worked in sweatshops leap from the whatever floor it was and die one after the other because the exits are blocked because there's no rules. Al Smith, is appointed as an assemblyman to represent Tammany, really, on this reform commission to look into working conditions for children and for women. And one of the men who worked with Al Smith on this commission said, we'd go to these factories. The owners would say we had no children working for us. What they did, they'd put them into these 7 or 8-year-old kids who worked 7 days a week from dark to dark. They'd put them into elevators and put the elevators between floors so when the commission arrived there wouldn't be any kids there. And this man said, I watched Al Smith's face change when we made that tour of the state. And at the end of it, he says, I can't write too good. He said, you write the laws, I'll pass them. And he comes back to Albany a different man. And from that day on, and when he becomes governor of New York, for 10 years, he transforms social legislation in America. He was also, if I could just say, he was a great speaker. We don't have speakers like this anymore. Robert Moses, one of his first jobs was to write speeches for Al Smith, and Moses was a PhD from Oxford then, and he wrote Al Smith is running against this Republican governor named Nathan Miller, who's claiming that he saved the state, whatever, $14 million in economies, and Moses has analyzed this, dollar by dollar and disproved it, and he hands the speech to Smith just as Smith is going to walk out on the platform before this huge audience of farmers in Utica. Smith looks at the speech, he says, I think I'll say it a little different way, Bob. He walks out on the platform and he says, Governor Miller says he saved the state $14 million. I have just two questions. Where is it? And who's got it?
Kendallville, Indiana, you're next with Robert Caro. Go ahead, please.
Thank you for taking my call. Mr. Caro, it's an honor to speak with you.
Thanks.
And my question I have is about Johnson's character and our nation's character, and it has to do with loyalty.
Yes.
And the thing that fascinates about your books is I could read these people who Johnson abused, and you know how he was to work with.
Yes.
And I could just still feel the affection these people have for the man.
That some of them have, absolutely.
At the end, did Horace Buzzy have affection for him?
Oh, yes.
George Reedy?
No.
Walter Jenkins?
Well, can I say Jenkins is such a complicated story, Brian, that I'm going to tell it at length in the last volume. Too hard to say that. Horace Busby he idolized Johnson. It was a great asset to Johnson. Other of Johnson's aides have gotten more publicity, but in Johnson's early years, Horace Busby was his a real great speechwriter for him.
And what about Jim Rowe? He's quoted a lot in your book.
Jim Rowe, really liked Johnson.
Is he still alive?
No, he died. He was alive when the first book came out. Spent so much time educating me on Washington. He and his partner Tommy Corcoran. I used to go sometimes to their law firm. It was I think Corcoran, Rowe, and Foley or something. And Rowe would be giving this long, detailed things, and Mr. Corcoran would walk in and, in a very clipped, blunt Irish way, make the same point. They were a great help to me. I think Jim Rowe, to a very great extent, saw all the sides of Johnson, and saw that he could be a great president, that he was a great president in some ways. In this book, it's really fascinating because Johnson he believes in Jim Rowe's ability. I think we have a quote from George Reedy in there. He believed that Rowe had the ability to make him Pope or something, or something as president. The reason he believed that is that Rowe, when Harry Truman was running this this seemingly hopeless campaign in 1948, Rowe drafted a memo which really laid out a strategy that if Truman followed it, he'd win. Truman followed it, and whether it was because he followed the memo or not, he won. So Johnson had this mystical belief in Rowe, and it's really fascinating that at the moment in 1957 when Johnson is teetering on whether to stop fighting for the Civil Rights Bill because it seems hopeless, and it does seem hopeless, he's down on the Pedernales on his ranch, and he gets this memo from Rowe, and the line that leaps out of it in my memory is, "This is Armageddon for Lyndon Johnson. You either pass this Civil Rights Bill or you can forget about the presidency in 1960.
We have an hour and a half to go with Robert Caro. We go to Oxford, Maryland. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. This is Jim Dewar in Oxford, Maryland, and I am publishing a book next year on the nuclear rocket program, in which Senator Clinton P. Anderson is a key figure. I have three questions for you. Can you comment on the friendship that Johnson and Anderson had over the years? Two, can you comment on the role of Anderson and Johnson in the forming of NASA? And three, I've been trying to find the photo credit for that photo you showed of Johnson, Kerr, and Anderson, and I'm wondering if you can help me.
I'm afraid I can't help you with the photo credit. You'll have to ask my publisher. And a lot of what you asked me about Anderson will fall into the purview of the next volume, so I'm still working on that. But in the Senate, you know, their relationship is very interesting because they're two very practical politicians. There's a scene which, I don't say I wrote it wonderfully, but it's a wonderful scene. When Johnson is trying to pass this Civil Rights Act, there's this sticking point. No one seems to find, let's see if I can explain this, if I can even remember it. And no one seems to know a way to get this amendment drafted, to alter this amendment. Everyone's trying to modify it. Clinton Anderson is sitting but the people who are trying to modify it are Southerners and conservatives, and the liberals will never accept it from a Southerner or conservative. Clinton Anderson is sitting there in a corner. His desk was in the lower corner of the Senate arc, and he simply crosses out this clause. I managed to. I got this. Dick Baker, the Senate historian, actually found me the draft of the bill with Anderson's X across it, and but that wouldn't have helped because only Johnson saw the use to make of it. That this was something being proposed not by a Southerner or a conservative, but by a liberal. He walks over to Anderson and says, Anderson hands him the thing. Johnson looks at it, and in one flash of a moment, as the debate is going on around him, he says, yes. He says, but you, and Anderson says, get a liberal to introduce it. And Johnson says, no, you do it. Because he knows that Anderson is so respected and as a moderate that he can bring other votes along with him. I didn't explain that very well. So.
Here's the picture, and the cut line says, new Senator Lyndon B. Johnson allows new Senator Robert Kerr to take center stage. Senator Clinton Anderson is at his right. He was a Democrat from New Mexico. Did you pick the photos for the book?
No, the photos for the book were picked by the same woman who has, the managing editor of Knopf, Catherine Horrigan, who has worked with me for 30 years. She works with my editor, Bob Gottlieb.
Who's worked with you for 30 years.
For 30 years. And the two of them, in some way, which I'm not privy to, she finds many of the photos, he and she select them. They're laid out by someone else. And I have to say, since I have nothing to do with them, that they're really wonderful photo sections, and I think they add something to the book. And Kathy, I thank you for them, and Bob, I thank you for so much, as I said in the dedication.
Now, you did two excerpts in the New Yorker this time. One was on the 1957 Civil Rights Bill.
Yes.
And the other one was on this man, Hubert Humphrey.
Yes.
Was that your idea to have those two subjects? Did you make the decision in the New Yorker?
No, the New Yorker picked what to do.
Why?
David Remnick, the editor.
Why so much attention on Hubert Humphrey?
Oh, really good question. Started out very differently, you know. It started out as something, for a reason, very different. I've always felt that it's sort of boring to give the reader a lecture on a political movement. Like I said once in the first volume, I can either give a lecture to the reader and explain what Texas populism is. I have to explain what Texas populism is because Lyndon Johnson was a product of this. But I can either do it with a lecture, or I can tell the life of Sam Rayburn, whose life embodied this. In this book, Southern Racism, you can either give a lecture on how it played out politically in the Senate, or you can do the life of Richard Russell. Humphrey, I started out because I wanted to show what prairie populism was, so I spent a great deal of time researching his early life, and I found out I really only knew the Hubert Humphrey who was Lyndon Johnson's vice president, who really was a cowed and subservient character. When I'm doing this, I learned what a great mayor he was of Minneapolis, what a crusader he was as a mayor of Minneapolis. There was a very touching letter in the New Yorker in response to my excerpt from a black woman who said to the New Yorker, thanks for running this excerpt. My mother used to tell me how because of Hubert Humphrey, I may be misquoting this letter a little bit, but not much, Minneapolis was the only city in the country where a black person and a white person could get married and not have to be afraid walking the streets. You know, he stopped, when he became mayor, Minneapolis was known as the anti-Semitism capital of America. He stopped all that. He created the first FEPC in America. He was a great crusader. And I decided if I told the story right, I could show prairie populism. Then came the part that everyone talks about in the New Yorker, that's in the book, this incredible speech that he gives on the 1948 convention that everyone is saying is the most exciting speech that I ever heard. Well, you know, that sounds to me like maybe, maybe not. But I finally got a newsreel outtake of the whole speech. It's only 8 minutes long, and it is the most exciting speech I've ever heard. And so I try to dramatize his role in civil rights.
We're going to play an audio tape in a moment, but we got callers waiting. I want to grab them. Mount Pleasant, Texas, you're on the air.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Caro.
Good afternoon.
You told us of your 3-day visit with John Conley in
Yes.
Floresville, Texas.
Yes.
Can you describe for us your technique of collecting ideas and quotes from Conley and from others? Do you take notes? Do you use a voice recorder? And how does this affect the quality of the information that you obtain? I'd like to hang up and listen, please.
Okay. I don't use a tape recorder, except in very rare instances, because, well, I have to tell you that this is really a minority view. Many of the best writers and reporters, I suppose almost all of them, do use tape recorders. And what they say is that people forget after a while that the tape recorder is on. I don't believe that. I have to say, not for 1 minute when I'm being interviewed do I forget the tape recorder is on. And I feel that therefore the tape recorder is in a way, maybe a small way, but never an impediment to frankness, an impediment to truth in a way. When I was still a reporter on Newsday, I developed a method of speed writing where I can get down every word if it's something where every word should be taken. I was very interested in regard to that I once interviewed Mrs. Johnson, Lady Bird Johnson, for some hours, and she taped the interview, and I wanted to check my notes against it, which was page after page of handwritten notes. And when I checked them against the actual tape, there were very few words that were different. I also would like to say, since I've said that, and you might say, well, what if people claim they're misquoted? I have to say there have been a lot of attacks on my books, mostly by, well, there have been attacks on my books, but nobody has ever in my whole life, as far as I know and remember, claimed that I misquoted them.
What are you going to do with the notebooks?
Well, I have a real problem as what to do with the notebooks, which contain information that no one else has, because, as I say, the Lyndon Johnson Library, which would be the obvious place for it, without going into it any further, because I still have to work down there, is not a place that has not been a place where I would want my archives to be. Other colleges want it.
Princeton?
Well, I have to think about that.
Will they be available for people to see someday?
Oh, they must be, yes. Because, you know, everything that's in my books, I mean, well, just because I've been working with it, I'm sure I'm not exaggerating if I say I have hundreds. When I take the notebooks, I take, you know, in hand. But my rule is, and very seldom broken, I have to say, is I come home and transcribe those notes on my typewriter before I go to bed, because I don't want to have an interval of sleep. I want to remember their reactions, because I put the reactions, the facial expressions, in my notes. And if I miss, you know, I want to remember turns of phrase that I might not have put it down. I've never counted how many, you know, for this book alone, I've done over 1,000 interviews. If you looked at my files, the typed transcripts of the notes, I mean, are just, they're thousands of pages. And
Did you duplicate them?
Oh, sure. I put them in different places so that if there was ever a fire in my office, there would be other...
It's backed up.
Oh, yes. Because they contain, I have to say, Brian, a lot. I mean, only, you know, you say, what proportion of them gets into your books? You know, tiny. And yet you want people to know this other stuff. I mean, I've got things, and you know, for other, you can approach Lyndon Johnson, other aspects of him that I haven't been able to go into, other things that he did say in the Senate. And you want people to have all this information. And you're constantly saying, and these people are dying, you know. Now with Horace Busby, you know, I mean, I don't know how many interviews I had with Busby. I mean, I interviewed him, well, I think I say in the back of the book, I don't remember how many typed, you know, some of these interviews went on all day, you know, in Washington. In addition to that, he would call me with information, you know, and he knew he was giving me information that no one else possessed. He had a stroke. His children, who are devoted to him as they should be, he's quite a wonderful, if a very iconoclastic man, moved him out to California so they could take care of him. And he would call me, you know. And then he learned to, he had another stroke, I believe, but he went blind. But he had touch type because he had been a reporter once. So he used to type me these letters with information, with stories, anecdotes in them. The only reason you knew he was blind was that sometimes the line would run off the page, and you'd know he didn't know that. Then he'd sign it with this huge wavering B. And, you know, near the end, you know, it was very important to him that he get all these stories and anecdotes out to me, or whatever. His last letter to me is something like, was in the hospital again for 2 days, really bad time, didn't know I'd come out. All I could think of was, now Bob will have no one to tell him about the vice presidency. So he says, I'm better now. I don't know that he really believed that, because he signed the letter with a word he had never used before, farewell. And a little while later, he was dead. So you feel that these interviews that you have obtained are sort of sacred. And we're never going, I mean, there will be other biographies of Lyndon Johnson, and whoever does them, or there will be other things on Vietnam, the other things in American history. And you really feel you have to have these in a place where they're not, you know, it's easy to give them to a library. You have to make sure the library treats them in a way where the people have access to it, because I myself have so much trouble, you know, sometimes going to Senator, and Ina has trouble going to the papers of a senator or something. They really, it's not easy to make a collection of things so people can find what's in it. It happens to be very hard, very expensive, and very time-consuming. So I have to find the right place.
Bob Caro's brand new book called Master of the Senate. It'll be in your bookstores on April the 23rd. This is his first interview about this new book. We go to Mesa, Arizona. Thank you for waiting. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Caro, great honor to be speaking with you. I've read both your books. They're immensely very well written. I'm from Texas myself, and was out at the LBJ Ranch last fall. I don't recall seeing either Means of Ascent or Path to Power, but certainly you are very well known. A couple of thoughts here. You didn't interview Coke Stevenson.
No.
And I'd like for you to share your thoughts about that. Also, a little bit of the contrast between Mr. Stevenson. You touched upon it already a little bit, but if you can go a little bit more in depth about his character and his approach to political campaigns as opposed to LBJ. And then lastly, I'd like to get your thoughts during LBJ's final days, what his views were on Nixon, whether they had changed or not. I think at one time he had referred to Nixon as the chronic campaigner, but just did his thoughts at all change on his predecessor? I mean, on his the fellow who followed him?
I'm going to say that I'm still working on his final days, which is certainly poignant, and his views to Nixon, so I'm going to take a pass on that. I've spoken, you know, earlier in this program about the difference between Coke Stevenson's campaigning and Lyndon Johnson's campaigning, the old campaigning of Stevenson driving from town to town, and Johnson with the media campaigning, Of course, Johnson campaigned in a helicopter during this. That's Coke Stevenson, the cowboy governor. You really felt, you know, people have asked why I spent so much time going into the legend of Coke Stevenson. Because it was necessary to show how strong this legend was and the hold it had on the people of Texas, the reverence that they had for Coke Stevenson, in order to show the power of media politics, negative campaigning if you want. It can destroy anything. However conservative or racist Coke Stevenson may have been, he was a hero to the voters of Texas. So for someone to come along, a congressman, and defeat him, you have, you know, one way to show the power of something. Whenever I see people writing about the power of negative campaigning and how strong it is, which we're coming to appreciate now, I say it was less appreciated then, 1989 or 90. It was some appreciated, but the best way to show the power of something is to show it, the contrast, when you have the ultimate contrast. What more could be a contrast than a guy who will not use media campaigning, who drives from town to town, campaigns as an individual, and a guy who's buying all this radio time and using modern polling techniques, modern media techniques. I said, I first have to show what Coke Stevenson was in order to show how Lyndon Johnson destroyed that.
Here's a photograph from 1941 in your Path to Power book of Lyndon Johnson. You describe him in your book. I mean, you talk about the ears, the hands. What struck you as being the most prominent part of Lyndon Johnson physically?
Well, something that came from within him, but became physical, Brian. I hope I described him right this way in the book, because, you know, everyone talks about Johnson, how he was huge, of course. He was almost 6'4". He had his hands were huge even for his size, and his arms were very long even for his size. And of course, he had a face that he had a very prominent nose, very prominent chin, these huge ears. Blazing eyes. Everybody who talks about Lyndon Johnson talks about his eyes. But the thing that got me in the Senate, they talk about how he was a persuader. You know, we all know how he would put his hand around you, grab your lapel, you know, punch in the chest with his forefinger if you weren't agreeing with him, right? It was what was inside him, the passions and the emotions, the beliefs and desires, the ambition and compassion that he had, that was so strong, that made that finger, it was like the body, big as it was, couldn't contain it, and it made the finger jab out, and it made this blaze out of his eyes. So that's what I tried to portray in this book. I am not sure that I did it adequately.
Oxnard, California, you're on the air.
Mr. Caro, it's such a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks.
I would like to talk about power brokers and
Yes.
Robert Moses. I'm a displaced New Yorker.
Okay.
I read the book, and every day I reported to my friends, my family, and my neighbors what an SOB he was. Every night I would read, and my mouth would just drop how he got away with things. Also, how he destroyed people, same as you just talked about LBJ destroying people. I also want to reminisce about, you said about the collecting of the tolls. I remember when the Belt Parkway, the Valley Stream toll booth was put up, and then I think is it the only toll booth in the world that was taken down because it's gone?
I don't know.
But it's I was surprised at that, having grown up and going out to Long Island and Jones Beach was such a big thing. But thank you for your books, and could you please talk about Mr. Moses and how he destroyed people and the overt power the corruption of the power, how he started off as such a reformer and how he just went downhill. Thank you so much for that book.
Could I ask you to tell the story in conjunction with this call of the Central Park parking lot at Tavern on the Green?
Sure. It was another Robert Moses. You know, he wanted to him the automobile was paramount. Everything should be sacrificed to the automobile. There was this beautiful playground. I actually can see it from my window when I shave in the morning. That was on 67th Street. I live on 69th Street in Central Park. And Moses was determined to turn it into a parking lot. And the mother is on 67th Street. this was way back before they had picketing as we know it today. And they wheeled their baby carriages in front of the bulldozers and stopped them. And it was really one of the first times that he was stopped.
Here's a picture of him. You see it a lot. What is this one?
That's a picture of Robert Moses taken on a beam. He's standing on a beam, and that's Robert Moses. And if you turn the page, you'll see the guy I wrote about, or that's Robert. That's the Robert Moses I wrote about, and I think that picture.
For somebody tuning in and have never heard of Robert Moses, quick capsule of who he was.
Sure. You fly. It's the easiest way to do it for people who never lived in New York. You fly into New York. Let's say you're coming in to LaGuardia. So your plane turns over Connecticut for the approach, and you pass the Throgs Neck Bridge. Robert Moses built that. Then you pass the Bronx Whitestone Bridge. Robert Moses built that. Then you fly over the Henry Hudson Bridge and turn around. Robert Moses built that. And then you come back over the Triborough Bridge. Robert Moses built that. If you're flying into Kennedy, you see the Verrazano Bridge. Robert Moses built that. The Cross Bay Boulevard Bridge, the Marine Parkway Boulevard Bridge. Robert Moses built that. He built every major bridge built in New York in the last 3/4 of a century. He built, you look down and you see the city streets, the grid of the streets, but slashing across them are these big, straight, gray lines. And those are the expressways and the parkways. With one exception, the East River Drive, every one of those miles, every one of those roads was built by Robert Moses. He built 672 miles of expressways and parkways. Every park in the city he either created or recreated, shaped or reshaped. 40,000 new acres of parks in New York. He held power for 44 years, almost half a century in New York, and in the fields in which he chose to exercise it, which were the fields which shaped the city forever, or for centuries, let's be more accurate. He had more power than any mayor or any governor or governor combined, and he was never elected to anything.
Robert Moses is the subject of Robert Caro's first book called The Power Broker. It came out in 1974. Since then, he's had 3 books, including the new one we're talking about today called Master of the Senate. The first Lyndon Johnson book came out in what year?
1982.
The second one, Means to the Senate?
1990.
And this was the third one. I remember when I interviewed in 1990, you said that the book Master of the Senate would be out in 2 years.
Sorry that you remember that.
And here we are in 2002. Any guess as to when your book on the presidency will be out?
Well, I don't want you coming back
and
hitting me in the face again. I hope this will be a lot faster because, as I say, I've done a lot of the interviewing and a lot of the work already.
San Diego, thanks for waiting.
Yeah, hi, Brian. My question, Mr. Caro, your books are outstanding. I have a question about Huey Long. Did LBJ ever express an opinion on Senator Long, and do you see a lot of similarities between those men? And I have a follow-up question, if you will.
Okay. Lyndon Johnson used to say that when he was a young congressional assistant, he'd go and sit in the Senate gallery to watch Huey Long speak. He often compared himself to Huey Long. I myself am not sure that comparison really holds in too many ways. What's your follow-up question?
Okay, the question is, well, 2 actually. Do you like LBJ after doing these histories? And also, the corruption in American elections that you talked about in the Senate, is that pervasive? Or thank you.
I'm sorry.
Sir,
I didn't understand the last question.
I didn't hear it, and I apologize. Let's go on to Portland, Maine.
Okay,
Portland, go ahead, please. You're on the air.
Yes. One of the questions I wanted to ask is how did Lyndon Johnson maintain his relationship with J. Edgar Hoover when McCarthyism came up there, because they had such a close relationship, or he cultivated J. Edgar Hoover as part of his, like he did with the Senate majority leaders and with the Speaker of the House. And the second part of it is, if you get into the civil rights there of where the votes were traded off to get the final passage there, who had to be compromised into switching votes to get that thing done.
Can I ask you to talk about Hell's Canyon at that point on the Civil Rights Bill?
Sure. About the first part, I'm going to give the same answer that J. Edgar Hoover and Lyndon Johnson, I'm not done with the work yet, so I don't know what to say on that. But the trading of votes to get this first civil rights bill in 1950, you have to understand, no civil rights bill had passed the Senate since the end of Reconstruction, since 1875. For 82 years, every civil rights bill that came up in the Senate had been killed by the South. Now, in 1957, the South had never been in a more, in a stronger position. As I said, I hope earlier in the program, there were 15 standing committees in the Senate. The Southerners controlled 8 of the most powerful, and their allies controlled another 1 and 2. Their power seemed just about invincible in the Senate. To get this bill passed, one thing Johnson has to do is to try and it's hard to sum this up. Johnson has to have an incredible blend of his really savage determination to get it done. It is going to be passed. A grasp on the floor of instantaneous, you know, in legislation, when you're having a debate on the floor and things are flying back and forth and people's opinions are changing, as they sometimes do change in the Senate, then you have to have the genius to grasp that moment. I mean, that's like a battlefield genius, and Lyndon Johnson had that. But then you have to have, and this is what Brian is asking me about, you have to have something more. You have to have the genius not of just of a battlefield tactician, but of a national strategist. And Lyndon Johnson could see the Senate in terms of a whole country. And that is basically one of the key reasons that this 1957 Civil Rights Bill gets passed. Tough to sum this up. The South is afraid to go forward with the bill because it's gotten no allies. So it can stop the bill absolutely by using a filibuster, which is never going to be broken at this point in history. Johnson has to bring some allies to their side. He sees that possible allies are from the mountain states, the Rocky Mountain states, Oregon and Washington, the states of the Pacific Northwest. If only he can find a way to bring these two groups together. And then I wrote in the book, he found the way. It wasn't in the South. It wasn't in the Appalachians, which were next to the South. It wasn't in the Great Plains that stretch out from the Appalachians. It wasn't in the Rockies. It was on the far side of the Rockies. It was in a canyon called Hell's Canyon. The senators of the Pacific Northwest wanted a federal dam in Hell's Canyon. They had never been able to get it through because, among other reasons, and this is really a drastic oversimplification, the South had not wanted it because they didn't like public power, they wanted private power. Johnson persuades the South to give the Northwest enough votes to approve the Hell's Canyon Dam, and in return, the Northwest gives the South enough votes to give the South what it wants so it can let this bill move forward. It's a stroke of sheer genius. I mean, when you say, who could bring these two parts of the country, so different in philosophy, so different in interests, together? That's what legislative genius is. You know, we don't think of that genius in the United States. To us, political genius we think of as it's executive genius, it's presidential genius, that's what's written about. Legislative genius is something very different. That's what this book is about. This is about a different kind of genius. It's about brokering, about compromises, about making deals, not about leading a country with oratory and inspiring them. England has 1 million biographies, or at least 100, because it's got a parliamentary system and its leaders are parliamentary leaders. Gladstone and Disraeli, there are great biographies on Gladstone and Disraeli and Pitt and Peel, etc. We, in my opinion, have a very inadequate understanding of what legislative genius is, and that it's just as important in a democracy as executive genius. And there are times when we can see this. I said earlier that I try and show things by using the life of a man rather than by giving a lecture. If If you study Lyndon Johnson's career in the Senate, in my opinion, you are seeing legislative leadership and, in the case of something like Hell's Canyon, legislative genius.
Here is what the book looks like. It's 1,167 pages long. Can you compartmentalize it? We know that you write a lot about the Civil Rights Bill of 1957. The first couple hundred pages, a lot of discussion about Richard Russell and the Senate itself.
Right.
Talk about Hubert Humphrey in the book. What else? What other major chunks?
Well, the other major chunk is Lyndon Johnson. I mean, this guy, you know, when he's young, I mean, you'd have this guy, you know, swaggering in the House of Representatives. He's rushing through the halls, pushing through the halls. He wears these unbelievable, you know, his weight went up and down. In this book alone, his weight went between 175 and I think 225, and I think he went up to 240 later. That's quite a picture. That he's wearing a Fat Max tie. That's what they called them in Texas then.
But it's also, by the way, you look right here, it's a Countess Mara tie, which is a very expensive tie.
Well, I didn't realize it was. But are those are elephants? Or
I don't know what they are, but right there is the CM for Countess Mara.
Well, and he wanted, because his weight went up and down, and he wanted to conceal it. What he would do is have his suit jackets and his pants cut so big, so when his weight was at a lower level, they would flap around him. You know, the first time someone said to me, you know, when he would walk around, his jackets would flare out. If he turned around, they'd flare out. I didn't believe that, you know, but it turns out to be true. And he had these mannerisms about him. He's a titanic figure as an individual.
Dallas, Texas, and we got about an hour to go with Robert Caro. Go ahead, please.
Hey, thanks, C-SPAN, for the opportunity to talk to Mr. Caro, and want to really thank him for some education he's provided those of us interested in Johnson. If I could just reel off a couple of things about Johnson's scandals previous to him becoming president. Specifically, to your point about the library and archives, there's Clint Peoples, a Texas Ranger, gave his archives to Dallas Public Library. And if you go there and look for it, you won't find it. Who has it? You know, maybe a judge in Texas with the initials BS. Who knows? But my point is that Clint Peoples investigated a murder of a man named Henry Marshall, you might be aware of. And it all ties into the cotton allotment scandal, some Billy Saul Estes activities. And for years, Clint Peoples, at the behest of the Marshall family, stayed on this doggedly and pursued who he thought was guilty of this murder. And ultimately, this led to a grand jury indictment that named Cliff Carter, Lyndon Johnson, Malcolm Wallace as being party and co-conspirators in the death of Henry Marshall. Now, had these men been alive at the time, they would have faced grand jury indictment in that county. Now, that's one of many scandals that linked to Johnson that were investigated by Congress, which I'm under the impression these investigations have been sealed by Johnson's own people, and we're not even allowed to view what Congress found out about Johnson. Now, I don't know if that's true or not.
Let me ask Robert Caro if it is. Is it true?
Well, I'm not aware. That's another thing that I'm going to say I'm not done looking into. I'm not aware that Lyndon Johnson was ever indicted as a conspirator into the murder of Henry Marshall. I'm not aware of that. I'm also not aware that Congress investigated that. Certainly the scandal that you're talking about is one of these huge scandals, the Billy Saul Estes, Henry Marshall scandal, that has to be at least referred to and going into at least to some extent in my last volume on Lyndon Johnson, because it's a part of his story, but it's not something I've looked into yet.
We ask you to bring some personal pictures along with you, and I have here a scrapbook that says Master of the Senate 2002. I'm just going to open it up and ask you to comment on a picture or two in here. This is your wife, Ina. When was that picture taken?
I'm not sure. In the last couple of years. That's me and Ina. Ina is the whole team. A wonderful writer. Her book, The Road from the Past. Now a lot of people don't like my books, but everybody likes hers. And she's a great researcher.
Where's this picture from?
That's me, age something.
You don't remember what age?
No.
You remember what age this was taken?
Well, I do sort of remember that. That's about because I remember.
Where'd you live?
We lived on Central Park West. My mother got sick in that year. I think I was 5 years old.
Mentioned Horace Mann School earlier. This
Yes.
is, I think, from Horace
Yes.
Mann.
I'm in the middle. I'm the editor of the Horace Mann Record. On my right is Gerald Jonas, who's the editor of the Horace Mannequin, the yearbook, and on my left is Michael Cooper, who in my memory, possibly faded, was the editor of the literary magazine. So that's the three editors there.
On the other side is this photo. What year?
That year was 1956. That is actually the moment. This is a rare photo. This is the very moment that I first met my wife, Ina. It was at a dance at Princeton. It was called the Prince Tiger Dance. I think my title was managing editor or something in the Daily Princetonian, which ran the dance. And therefore, I was sort of the MC. And a photographer came up to take my picture. And I had noticed this beautiful young woman dancing with somebody else, right? And I had been eyeing her all evening. So when the photographer said, came up to take the picture, I said, why don't I take it with someone else? For example, her. The photographer brought her up, and we made our acquaintance.
Where is this picture?
That's on our honeymoon. That's at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado. That's a long time ago.
How long did you two date before you married?
I guess about 2 years or so.
This picture with Nelson Rockefeller?
Right, that's an interesting picture. When I was a reporter, you see the expression on the governor's face is somewhat less than enthusiastic. I had done this series of investigative articles for Newsday. The governor a bill had been passed, and the governor was signing it ostensibly because it would clear up this scandal. He invited me to the office. I was saying at this moment, but the bill isn't really going to work, and you can see the expression on the governor's face.
Here's a color photo. From what year is this?
Well, I don't know. It's when my son would have been, I guess, 6 or 7, so we would be talking like in the 1965 or something.
And he is 44 years old, did you say earlier?
Yeah.
You're
43.
You're 66?
Yes.
Graduated from Princeton in 1957?
Correct.
Have written 4 books?
Yeah.
You still get up every day and hard charge on this subject of Lyndon Johnson?
I don't know if hard charge is applicable.
I mean, are you excited today as you've always been?
Yeah, it's sort of thrilling.
Why? Why still?
Well, because for a lot of reasons. For one thing, he never stops being fascinating and new. But more to the point, you once asked me in a previous interview, and I thought it was the best question. I mean, why do you write about these? I've never wanted to write about a Lyndon Johnson or a Robert Moses, just to tell the story of a great man, Brian. I'm interested in political power and using the life. You want me to stop talking?
Well, I just wanted to ask you who this was.
That's my editor, Bob Gottlieb. This book is dedicated to him as well as to Ina. The dedication says to Robert Gottlieb, 30 years, 4 books, thanks. That's the day the first copy of The Power Broker came in, out of which he and I had to cut 350,000 words.
And I didn't mean to interrupt, but you were talking about you're really interested in power.
Oh, so
but at what moment did you pick Lyndon Johnson?
I picked him long before I started on him because I was a reporter. I got more and more interested in political power. I discovered that I really didn't have any understanding of it. And as far as urban power in New York State was concerned, so much of it revolved around this man, Robert Moses. We had been taught that in a democracy, power comes from a ballot box, from being elected. Here was this guy who was never elected to anything, and he had more power in his fields than anybody else. I said before, more than any governor or mayor combined. So I did The Power Broker not primarily to tell the life of Robert Moses, but to try to find out, because I didn't know, and then to try to explain where he got the power. And by doing that, I felt I was coming close, not to what we're taught in textbooks, but to the real raw essence of what urban political power is, not just in America, but in all the cities of the United States in the 20th century. Now, all the time we were doing this book, we were broke. I just wanted to try to finish this book and get back to a salaried job. I never thought I'd be able to do another book. But I realized that I'd like to do the same thing with national power. And of all the politicians in the second half of the century, which was the century that I knew, Lyndon Johnson was the guy who understood it best. And you ask why I'm all excited, because it was thrilling to learn about the hill country, to have to move a city boy like me up to the edge of the hill country and spend 3 years trying to learn it. That's thrilling to do that. Then it was thrilling to learn about a stolen election. I said, I'm going to show you. People keep talking about stolen elections. I'm going to show America what a stolen election is by looking at one stolen election. And this book, I really have to say, I've spent 12 years trying to learn the world of the United States Senate of the 1950s, which is very different from the Senate of today. And it was just great. I mean, there were moments in this, you know, that on my desk, as I'm putting my files away, and I just came across a fax from Richard Baker, the Senate librarian, and on the front of it says, "Bob, we got lucky, here it is." Well, what it is a list of the subcommittees of the various standing committees. I think it's in 1953, because I had come to realize from talking from all these administrative aides and other Senate aides that a lot of the Southerners' power, a lot of power in the Senate, was exercised not just through appropriations committees, say, but through the subcommittees of appropriations. These subcommittees sometimes only had 5 people or 7 people. No one knew what they were doing. I wanted to show, and someone said to me, if you look at these subcommittees, you'll see all the key ones, the Southerners made sure that they had the casting votes. If it was a 7-member committee, that they or their allies would have 4 votes every time, say. Well, I wanted to write about that, but I couldn't do it if I didn't have the membership of the subcommittees, and I was told we don't have that. No one lists the members, you know, after all this time of the subcommittees. But once again, because the Senate historian, Dick Baker, and his associate historian, Don Ritchie, wouldn't stop working for me. I mean, it's a very selfless thing. I mean, I can never express my gratitude to them adequately. They found it. I forget, they found it in some Senate payroll thing, some place where you wouldn't expect to find it. So it's thrilling to me.
And there's a whole chapter about Lyndon Johnson's chairmanship of the Preparedness Subcommittee when he dealt with the Korean War.
Right.
Just like Truman had dealt with World War II.
Right. I mean, you talk about things that, I mean, someone would say, how can you write about, I don't know how many pages I spend in that book, but it's a lot on a subcommittee. Because this subcommittee was the instrument, the first instrument in which Lyndon Johnson raised himself out of the crowd. It's how you use a subcommittee with genius.
Some more personal pictures, and this is what year would you say?
This was last year in France. Ina and I go to France every summer, and this is our apartment there, or the apartment we had there. That's just that. That's a relaxed time for me. It's when Ina works very hard on her books.
And we're going to go back to phones in just a second, but I keep saying we're going to get to the Hubert Humphrey tape. This is a tape from 1964. Lyndon Johnson is president, Hubert Humphrey's in the Senate.
Okay.
And I just want to play this so you can get a sense of what their relationship was, at least on these Oval Office conversations.
Great.
Let's go with the tape.
Be quoting me on what I'm ready to do on these amendments. Just go on and tell what you all are doing.
Mr. President, that was not my quote, and I'm very sorry.
It's on all the tickers, though, and they're raising hell about it, and they're saying that...
I just was asked in the Senate, and I said, now, the President of the United States...
Don't quote me unless you talk to me, unless you know I won't say it, because I can say it down here, and I've been saying it every press conference since I came in here, and they would like very, very much to say I weakened the bill, and I'm not going to... That's not my position. I'm against any amendments. Going to be against them right up till I sign them. Now, you all can take whatever you want to with the advice of the Attorney General.
That's what I said here this morning. I said the President of the United States wants the House bill. And I said the President of the United States, our job in the Senate is to legislate. The President of the United States is not going to tell us what to do. And that he's a reasonable man, and we will do what we are required to do here, and then the President will have to decide what he wants.
That's good. That's the thing to do, and that's the way to handle it.
This is just a brief excerpt. It's from the Oval Office tapes. Hubert Humphrey did not know he was being taped. Lyndon Johnson did, of course. What did you hear there?
The voice of a man in command. And that's the tone in Johnson. Then, of course, that is the tone with which he spoke to Humphrey as vice president.
By the way, next week they're going to release another 40 hours of tapes. We carry them every Saturday afternoon on our radio station and on the web. What do you think of this whole audio tape release by the Johnson Library?
I'm not going to answer that. I'm going to write about that.
In your next book?
I may write something separately about that.
Because you know something we don't know?
I didn't say that. I just said that I'm going to discuss it.
Austin, Texas, you're on with Robert Caro. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I grew up in San Antonio, and my family is from the South Texas area, Three Rivers and Rio Grande City.
Right.
And the Longoria story just affected me very personally. I just wanted to thank you very much for exposing that. It's just very hard to get that kind of historical accuracy in those stories. And I wanted to ask you, how difficult was it to research all of the interactions that went on between Hector Garcia and the funeral home, and because it is so local, but it had such a national impact. And anyway, I just really love your books.
Caller, why does this mean so much to you? Can you explain to the rest of the country?
Yeah, that history, it's so shrouded. Those people are so amazingly dispossessed. They have no voice. And I'm sorry, they don't have a voice, and the poverty in those areas is so striking, and the patriotism of that area and what they contribute as citizens, it's just really profound. I mean, they're just a very loyal and hardworking people, and they have never really had a voice, and they've never really had access to higher education, to a place at the table. And reading that story.
Thank you. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to get Mr. Caro's point of view on the Longoria story. What was it?
I'm so glad that you called about that. Of course, for those of you who don't know it, this occurred just about a week after Johnson got to the Senate. A Mexican-American soldier who had been killed in the Philippines during the war, his body is now being returned for burial, and his widow wants the body buried in Three Rivers in his hometown. And the Three Rivers funeral director refuses because he says the whites won't like it if the Mexican-Americans use the white chapel. And the widow goes to Hector Garcia, who is the founder of the Mexican-American GI Forum, and Garcia sends off 17 telegrams to 17 representatives and senators and the president. One of them goes to Lyndon Johnson's office. Now, Lyndon Johnson had both the compassion and the genius to make that compassion meaningful. This telegram comes into his office. We see it in the files. It's received at 8:49. It's Tuesday morning. Neither John Connolly or Walter Jenkins remembers which one opens it, but they're both standing there when Lyndon Johnson walks in. He takes the telegram, he looks at him, and he says the exact right thing. By God, we'll bury him at Arlington. And he arranges for Longoria's body to be given a hero's burial in Arlington. Now, of course, as with everything with Lyndon Johnson, that wonderful part of it, there is another part of it when the Anglo rulers of that area, your area, the Rio Grande Valley and up to Three Rivers, who really controlled politics there and who Johnson needed, when they become infuriated at him for this. If you read in the book, then John Connolly said, we began to backtrack. And the backtracking was an example of Johnson's, Connolly says, if I have this quote correct, I think I do, Lyndon never believed in being a dead hero, but he always knew what to do. That's what I mean when I say that power always reveals. When he gets the power, the compassion is revealed at last.
Bethel, Maine, you're on the air.
Mr. Caro, 3 quick questions on your non-relationship with the surviving members of the Johnson family. One, would it be safe to assume that's in spite of efforts that you made, both with Lady Bird and Linda, to establish some kind of communication?
Oh, sure. Mrs. Johnson spent a lot of time with me in the early years of the book. I think we had 7 interviews, very long interviews, very helpful interviews. They were not ended, I have to say, because of anything I wrote. Because they were cut off long before anything I wrote appeared. I've never, known why. Sometimes I think they suddenly realized that someone was really looking into all these stories about Lyndon Johnson, because so many of the stories about his youth and his young political career that had been told in every biography over and over again, when someone looked into them, weren't true.
Has Jack Valenti talked to you?
No.
Will he?
Oh, I doubt it.
You ever ask him?
Well, he's attacked me publicly,
Has Bill Moyers ever talked to you?
No, he hasn't, but I haven't asked him to, and I hope he will.
Anybody else that refuses to talk to you?
Moyers hasn't entered my,
right. Until he becomes president. Anybody else that refused to talk to you?
There are others. I have to, but I'm not remembering them off the top of my head.
Harry McPherson?
No, McPherson has refused to talk to me, and others. But, like when you say in the Senate career, who were the people who worked in Johnson's office? The back desks were the most important, were Connolly and Busby. They both talked to me all I wanted. Walter Jenkins, and then George Reedy, Mary Rather, Mary Louise Glass Young. Every one of them talked to me. With some of them I had, as I said, dozens of interviews. I list in the sources, maybe 20 or 25 Johnson people who. So while you would like to have these other interviews, and they would certainly add something, I think you have quite a bit anyway.
San Diego, thank you for waiting.
My question is, Mr. Caro, do you think most elections in America are clean, or are the things that happened in 1948 pervasive? Thank you.
That's a terrific question, and I'm going to take 1 minute to say, we're appearing at a program here, and I'm appearing with Brian Lamb, and as I hear these questions, and I think, where else in America do you get a chance? If you're an author, you're lucky if they give you 6 or 7 minutes to talk about something. Where else do you get to examine these things at such depth? I'm being given 3 hours here. If I can't explain myself in 3 hours, I don't have anything to explain. It's really all due to Brian Lamb, and I really do thank you. This is what should have been done for books. It's what's being done now, and everyone who cares about books in America should care about what you've done for them. Anyway, I'm done complimenting you. Your question is terrific. I'm not an expert on how pervasive stolen elections are in America, but this, obviously, they are not rare. People have criticized me for, in the second volume, spending so much time on talking about how Lyndon Johnson, about how I think they're gesturing at me that I'm looking in the wrong place. Where do you want me to look? Oh, sorry. People have criticized me about talking about Lyndon Johnson, how he stole this election in such detail. They say, if you looked at any campaign or whatever, wouldn't you find sort of the same things? Well, my answer to that is, if it is pervasive, if you would find it so pervasively in American politics, that's not a reason not to write about it. If I'm interested in political power and I'm trying to explain political power, that's a reason to write about it, to examine it in all the detail that you possibly can. Now, my vehicle for doing that is the life of Lyndon Johnson. This is his stolen election. This is an election that's very significant because whatever the truth about the Bush-Gore contest, which I don't pretend to know, widespread things were going on whichever side. This was not, Lyndon Johnson did not steal just the 202 votes that we learned about for so many years when they were found as in, quote, 6 days after the election by 202 voters who went to the polls in alphabetical order, right? He stole tens of thousands of votes, and I documented that. Nobody can ever again, in my opinion, be in doubt as to whether Lyndon Johnson stole his way into the United States Senate. So when you say that is the extent of what can be done with a stolen election, a statewide election, that's something that a lot of political scientists and a lot of historians should be looking at in detail. Anyway, I'm done with that.
Los Angeles for Robert Caro.
Hi, thank you. Actually, I wanted to ask you one thing. You've talked about a lot of things so far today. One thing I wanted to catch, you mentioned a speech that lasted 8 minutes, but it was the most exciting speech you've ever heard.
Yes.
Who gave that speech, sir?
Hubert Humphrey gave it at the 1948 Democratic Convention. The convention was going to pass yet another meaningless civil rights plank. They told him, he was told if he made a speech demanding a strong plank, his career would be ended. He decided to give the speech anyway. I can still see him on this videotape as he's giving it. His hand is up, his head is back. It only lasts 8 minutes. I think there were only 43 sentences. And I said before he was halfway through, the audience was cheering everyone. Hubert Humphrey had always had a voice that could bring people to their feet marching, and the delegates came to their feet now marching.
San Diego next. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Caro. Thank you very much. And hi, Brian.
Hi.
I just wanted to say I was really struck by your comment earlier about Connolly saying that Johnson represented the new politics. And given that, there seem to be, with the timing of your book, a lot of superficial similarities with the current president being from Texas, having the war, et cetera, I'd like Mr. Caro to kind of, if he could, comment on comparing and contrasting what's similar, what's changed, and especially in light of the current president's move to seal presidential papers.
Well, I'm not prepared to talk about similarities or differences between Lyndon Johnson and our present president because I've sort of been in my own world finishing this book, and I don't think I've thought that through enough. The other question about the access to presidential papers, which has not, the restriction of the access to presidential papers, which has not received enough attention in this country, nothing could be more serious. There is no reason for the public papers of the highest public official in the United States to be denied to the public of the United States. You can talk about that and analyze it, and lawyers can go back and forth, but that is the principle.
Philadelphia, go ahead, please.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Lamb. Your program is outstanding as always, and Mr. Caro, your books have been just simply fascinating, and I just bought it today on Amazon. Looking forward to getting it.
Okay.
And one topic that I thought you might be addressing in the book, I was curious about, maybe you could comment on, I don't think anyone's asked you about it today, is the role of the staff aide, Bobby Baker, in Johnson's mastery of the Senate. I was hoping you'd talk a little bit about that, about how that helped him, or how Bobby Baker was a colleague and an ally in the senator's rise to mastery of the Senate. And then also after that, if you might be able to comment on how the criticisms of your first two books, in particular the second book, and not just by Johnson loyalists, how that affected the words you chose and the tone of this most recent book.
Here's a picture. Thank you. Here's a picture in the new book of Bobby Baker and Lyndon Johnson.
Well, to take the end of your question first, the criticism of the book, not just by Johnson loyalists, but by critics, I suppose you're aware that both of these books, I don't usually say this, but since you asked the question in that way, were voted the best nonfiction book of the year by the National Book Critics Circle, which is about 700 of the most influential critics in the country. So you could hardly say that the critical reception of the book has been hostile, or that the criticism has been, that it's been mostly criticism. Bobby Baker is one of the Johnson people who would not talk to me. Nonetheless...
He didn't talk at all?
No. Nonetheless, there's quite a bit of Bobby Baker in this book because there are a lot of memorandums from him in the Johnson Library. and he is a figure in the book.
You have a chapter in this book. I'm trying to find it. I think it's titled 30th Place.
Yes.
We have some video of 4921 30th Place.
Oh, great.
What's so important about this house?
Well, that's Lyndon Johnson's home during this entire period.
In Washington?
Yes, it's a house of which you find many houses like that in Washington. Nothing spectacular about it except the man who lived in it. The thing that got me about it is many evenings in that neighborhood, when many nights, 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when there was only one light on. There was always a light in a bedroom of this house, because Lyndon Johnson wouldn't be sleeping. He'd be working to bend the Senate to his will.
And is this a house, did Sam Rayburn and Richard Russells go to this house?
Absolutely. On Sundays, they call them Lyndon's two daddies, and therefore he didn't want them to meet each other too often, so that they could each see how he acted to the other daddy. Luckily, I said there were 2 meals on Sunday, and Russell would come for lunch and Rayburn would come for dinner.
Here's a photo in the book of Lyndon Johnson at the Democratic Policy Committee. Is this George Reedy sitting right next to him there?
Yes.
And anybody else in there that looks familiar to you right offhand?
I can't quite.
Yeah, they're not.
I can't quite see.
Let's go to Romeo, Michigan. Romeo, Michigan. You're on the air.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi.
I'm a WW2 vet. 1944, out in the Southwest Pacific, I met Lyndon Johnson. He was with the captain of our squadron, which was flying around the islands out there. I followed him quite closely, so I'm going to try to get something across. I'm looking at a letter here dated September 22nd, 1937, to Mr. Prescott Bush, 59 Wall Street, New York, New York. It's about Dear Press. I've looked at the letter of the German-American cable company, et cetera, in regard to some bonds. It signs John Foster Dulles. Of course, he was a lawyer then. John Dulles became Secretary of State, of course, his brother, head of the CIA. Now the question is, George Bush, 45, was a young officer in the Navy just getting out, and that's about the time probably W was conceived. He was born 46. Bush, after Yale, went to Midland. Why suddenly an Eastern establishment man goes into Midland, Texas? Well, it's the big oil connections. Side note, yesterday the California Derby was won by a horse owned by part owner of Will Farish, who is Bush's ambassador to England.
Caller, what's the question regarding Lyndon Johnson, please?
Well, I wonder if you could tell us about the Yarborough Bush campaign, which is pretty rough, as I understand it.
I'm going to let you go. Is there any relationship in this to...
No.
I'm sorry, caller. It's just off the topic, and we need to keep moving because time is moving. Portland, Maine, you're on the air.
Yes, my name's George Vincent. I was calling in, and it's my impression that without Lyndon Johnson, the United States couldn't have gone into the last third of the century segregated, and that would be his greatest legacy to American politics.
Well, I think that while I'm not prepared to make a final conclusion on that until I examine his presidency in more depth, at the moment I think that there's no question that the advances in civil rights, which began in 1957, came to a climax during his presidency in 1964 and 65, and have changed America. However, unfortunately, slow progress may be in some areas. Would not have, Johnson was the moving figure. I wrote in this book, to me, the most important thing is voting rights, because what Johnson saw was everything else would come as long as he could give black Americans the right to vote. And I wrote, it was Abraham Lincoln who freed the slaves, but it was Lyndon Johnson who took them by the hand, led them into their voting booth, placed their hands on the lever that gave them control over their own destiny, and made them once and forever a part of American political life. So I think you might well be right.
Next call is Peoria, Illinois. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. Carroll.
Yes, sir.
I must compliment you the way I did 17 years ago when I had the distinct pleasure of spending about 2 hours with you when I took you from the Dallas-Fort Worth airport to Waco, Texas, where you were speaking at a public library function. And at that time, I told you that one of the most wonderful pieces of social history I'd ever read was your chapter on the sad irons in your first book.
Thanks.
So regardless of how people feel about Lyndon Johnson, they should try to get that book, because that piece of writing was a masterpiece on what it was like to live in Texas before air conditioning. The question I have for you is one I asked you in the car, and I think you kind of sidestepped it because you didn't want to give away the farm, so to speak, but I'm going to make you answer it now in front of everybody. When you write a controversial book like your first book, and you sort of give away your position on how you feel about these controversial issues on Johnson, how then do you relate to people like Lady Bird and certainly these people who have given their life away to Mr. Johnson when you try to talk to them later when you write your second book and your third book and your fourth book? Because certainly they aren't going to be as objective to you, toward you, when they then see that you are on one side of the fence or the other.
Thanks, caller.
Well, varies from person to person. In the case of the people who are most important, for example, to this book, I think I've said this before, John Connolly, Walter Jenkins, Horace Busby, George Reedy, Mary Rather, Ken Ballou, many others that I could name, they seem to feel whatever they thought of the first two books. I'm not going to repeat the complimentary things they say, and I'm not going to try to remember other things that they say, but they never stopped working with me and helping me. And to whatever detail and richness the Johnson books have, my Johnson books have, I'm really indebted to the members of his staff. You know, if you talk about Texas in the 1940s and 50s, perhaps the three most single important people to Lyndon Johnson were John Connolly, Edward Clark, the, quote, secret boss of Texas, Johnson's lawyer for 25 years, his principal lawyer for 25 years, who I mentioned before, and I was going to say Herman Brown. Herman Brown died, but George Brown, John Connolly, and Ed Clark, between the three of them, there's not much you can't find out about how Texas politics really was, and they both all three were very helpful to me.
I asked you this question at the beginning of the program, and I'll try it one more time. Okay. What do you think a reporter reading your book will come up as the lead new information in the newspaper stories once this book comes to publication date? Is there a lead?
I don't think there is. I mean, I suppose you could say they're sensational things in it, you know.
Give me one example of something you think.
He destroyed in 1949, before Senator McCarthy had begun. Lyndon Johnson used McCarthy techniques to destroy a leading liberal member of the Leland Olds. Another headline could be, Johnson rose to power faster than anyone in the history of the Senate. Another lead could be, Lyndon Johnson set out and passed the first civil rights bill since Reconstruction in the Senate, in which the South held most of the power. I mean, I don't think in terms of stories. I never have. And I don't know maybe there is a lead, but I don't see it at this moment.
Wheaton, Maryland, go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. In reference to Lyndon Johnson's residence, he purchased a house in Pearl Mesta in Spring Valley. He lived in that house for quite a while, him and Lady Bird and their daughters. I know because I was policeman. We had to protect that house until it was sold. And he also lived near J. Edgar Hoover on Garrison Street before he lived at this place.
That 30th place, yes.
He lived over there. Then he bought the house in Spring Valley, which at the time that he bought it, and he said he didn't notice, Afro-Americans and Arabic people.
I'm just not up to that.
Well, they could not be. It was in the leases. That you could check the leases. At that time, the leases, they could not buy into. He said he knew nothing about it. His wife said he knew nothing about it, and I don't know if Pearl Mesta knew anything about it. But he did live there, and the place was a beautiful house.
Thanks, caller.
Thank you.
You say you're not up to that point?
No, I'm not.
Is that something that would interest you?
Yes.
Sure. If they prohibited African Americans from living in that?
Well, yes. I mean, as again, I don't think it's a headline. I don't know, but what I have to say honestly is I haven't looked into it yet.
We have a little more tape of your wife, Ina, who we talked with a little bit, and we asked her about what, and I'm not sure this fits right exactly at the point, but ask her about what she learned about you in the time that you've worked together and been married. Let's watch Ina.
He really made me much more liberal than than I was to begin with, because being born in New Jersey, which was a little bit on the corrupt side politically, you had a feeling towards government that being born in New York City, you wouldn't have. And when he gave me this project for Johnson and the rural electrification, it was the first time I could see how government really could help people. And it made me about almost as liberal as he is.
For the last 2 hours and 45 minutes, we've been talking about this book, brand new, in the stores on April the 23rd, called Master of the Senate, The Years of Lyndon Johnson. Robert Caro is our guest, and here is a email from Irene Martinez. Was the Helen Douglas you are referring to a congresswoman, and from what state? Was she married to another person who eventually became a congressman and then a senator? And if Johnson was so close to Sam Rayburn from the beginning of his tenure in the House, why did he feel he would never go anywhere in the House or never have any power in the House? Was it because he was too close to Sam Rayburn and couldn't feel he could ever become Speaker unless Rayburn resigned or died?
Well, excellent questions. Helen Gahagan Douglas was a congressman from California. She was married to Melvin Douglas, the actor. The Sam Rayburn story, in the House, things go by seniority. And the House is a very big organization, 435 members. Johnson felt he was just one of a crowd. Rayburn would try to help him, but Rayburn really couldn't, because the rules of seniority, Johnson once tried to get Rayburn to get him to leapfrog some other members of the Texas delegation and get on the Appropriations Committee. And the man who Johnson tried to leapfrog, George Mahon, said, but Sam would never do that. He went by the rules.
You write about the affair between Lyndon Johnson and Helen Gahagan Douglas.
Yes.
We have some videotape of him talking to her years later when he was in the White House. Let's just listen to a little bit of what she sounded like. She was married to Melvin Douglas, the actor. Here's Helen Gahagan Douglas.
I want you to go as my representative with Dr. Wright from Fisk University to Liberia for their 100th anniversary of the relations between the United States and Liberia, and I'd like to go myself. I told the Vice President I'd try to come, but I can't do it, and it's this Saturday.
This Saturday?
Yes, this Saturday. What you shouting about? That's 4 days longer than you usually have.
Oh, Lyndon, listen,
Come on, chicken, now. Don't chicken on me.
Yeah,
This will be good for you. I want you to get back in the public eye a little bit, and I want you to, we're going to have to run against Nixon.
Is that where Loeb is?
I don't know. I don't know. He's one of them, but I don't believe so.
No, that's not the place he is, Liberia.
No. But Liberia, I believe, is the first African nation we recognize, and they're some of our best friends.
Yeah, I know.
And you don't have to be gone 3 or 4 days.
From the Lyndon Johnson Oval Office tapes with Helen Gahagan Douglas. They stayed friends all those years?
Yes, and Horace Busby talks about how while Johnson was vice president, he came over to Johnson's home one day, and there they were by the swimming pool holding hands. And Busby said, the thing about Lyndon Johnson, this is Busby's quote, mine would be somewhat more complicated, he could have real and deep feelings for more than one person at the same time.
Marin County, California, north of San Francisco. You're on with Robert Caro. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Caro,
yes, sir.
First of all, there's not enough complimentary words for your work, and so I'm not going to waste everyone's time. And I apologize in advance for asking a selfish question, but your work is so definitive that I don't think that I can offer up a Johnson question that isn't going to be dealt with or answered of any import. So forgive me for asking a selfish question. When your work on Johnson is finished, do you have an inkling of what you have in mind for us? Because I'm looking forward to something that might come afterwards that you'll tackle with the same excellent writing that you have in the past.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for all the nice things you say. I do, in fact, have one more topic that I'd like to do in my life. I'm very superstitious about saying what it is, so will you give me a pass on that?
Is it a person?
I do things through biography, yes.
And so is it again about power?
Yes, it is.
But
and if you say that Robert Moses was urban power and Lyndon Johnson is national power, then you can think at least the kind of power that I want to.
But excuse me for pointing out that you are 66 years old. Let's say you live to be 85. Is there time for all this?
That's why that was actually what I meant by superstitious. Of course, that's a real question, and it's one of the things that really upsets you. I mean, even when you worked on this book, you keep saying, well, what if I die, And as you finish each part of it, like on the seniority system and how the Senate had always stopped civil rights, you say, well, at least if I die now, people will know that, I've done that. Then if you say how Johnson rose to power, and how Richard Russell wielded the South, you say, well, that's done, at least it's done. And then you're really happy when you get to the end of the book, and I kept thinking, because I saved the civil rights for the last third of this book. I mean, you're one of my best readers, I said, this is all going in one place, and you got to see it all come together. I'm not spreading it out, doing it chronologically. I mean, you got to have Martin Luther King, the great black leader, but he can't do it alone. You need a white leader, and Eisenhower isn't going to lead, and no one else is leading. There is no leadership in the calls of power, of people who really have power. Someone has to come. Everyone is saying the black Americans need a Gandhi. Well, they have a Gandhi. It's Martin Luther King. But black Americans also need a Gladstone or a Disraeli. Otherwise, this wasn't going to come together. So I said, gee, I really want to do it that way, because you have to show the tides of history and the man who could take those tides and bend them in the way they should go in his way. And I was really happy when I finished that.
So it's Disraeli, your next book. Let's go to New York City. Go ahead, please. You're on the air.
I have a couple sort of strange, but very honest compliments that I want to pay. First of all, Mr. Caro is always available in New York City to a variety of organizations and speaks a lot. And I don't know if he knows that the joke in the audience while he's speaking is, among his readers, is we wish that he wasn't here, but that he was up in his office writing.
Thank you very much.
The other thing is that it's a true story, but 10 years ago this month, I had to eulogize my best friend who was a senior college administrator, and I had to report our last conversation. It's very true story, and I now laugh about it. And our last conversation was, to me, he said that I've had a great life, a great family. He died much too young. He said, and I'll be happy if I at least can live to read all the Caro Johnson books. And
those are really nice words. Thank you.
And it meant a lot to him. Let me just quickly ask you, though, who are the 3 or 4 living people who you're not going to get to because they won't talk to you, but who would add, you think, substantially to what the rest to the volumes that you have to finish?
Thank you, New York.
Well, I think Mrs. Johnson is in a class by herself. She would add something to the books that no one else could. I don't know that I'd put anyone else really in that category, because while many people say they were especially close to Lyndon Johnson, that's not the way Lyndon Johnson operated. Everyone was like, if he was the center, there were a lot of spokes to the wheel. If you have most of the spokes, as I do, I don't know that, of course, I certainly hope that people like Mr. Moyers will speak to me, but whether they do or not, I will go on with the books.
You quote, or you refer to Leslie Carpenter, the husband of Liz Carpenter, periodically. Has she talked to you?
Oh, no, she's always attacking me. I think
she's closest to Mrs. Johnson in all this.
I think so.
Topson, Maine, you're on.
Yes, it's a pleasure to speak with you. Being immersed in LBJ, I was wondering, what do you think his reaction would have been to the World Trade Center attacks if he had been watching that on television?
Interesting, because we have something on a much smaller scale which can tell us about his reaction, which was the USS Pueblo incident, which of course is not comparable in scope or horror to the World Trade Center, but again, it was an unexpected enemy, I call it an enemy provocation. Johnson had this fierce temper, but he could rein it in and calculate. He used to say something which is really true, that I'm at my best when the bullets are flying. I don't know what his reaction, that's always a bad thing to ask me because I'm dealing with a very unpredictable guy, but it would have been a very thoughtful, reasoned, and, knowing Lyndon Johnson, forceful response.
For those of you who are not Lyndon Johnson experts and haven't read Mr. Caro's books, and there are 3 now out on Lyndon Johnson, I want to show you the timeline of his life. He lived to be how old?
64.
1930. Well, that's the wrong spot on this whole thing. You can see 35, appointment director of the National Youth Administration, elected to U.S. House after the death of Representative Buchanan, 37.
Right.
Re-elected to Congress, 38. Next, 40, he was appointed Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Naval Reserve. How long was he in the Navy?
Well, he was in the Navy several years. He was in combat for about a matter of hours.
In 41, he lost for the U.S. Senate. By how big?
I think about 5,000 votes at the
48,
end.
he was elected.
Right.
Beat Coke Stevenson by 87. Was that in the primary?
No, yes, in the Democratic primary.
51, elected majority whip.
Right.
And then elected minority leader at age 44. Was that the youngest ever?
Youngest ever.
53, chairman of the Preparedness Investigating Subcommittee. You're going to have to go to the book to hear that story. It's a couple of pages at very least. Re-elected to U.S. Senate. 55, July suffered his first heart attack. 57, passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And 60, nominated and elected vice president, and then became president in 1963. Signed the Civil Rights Bill in July of 64. Dedicated the LBJ Library, 71, died in 73. We haven't said this, and we are running out of time. The 57 Civil Rights Bill, more than anything else, did what?
The 57, can I use one of Lyndon Johnson's typically rather vulgar but accurate phrases? It broke the virginity. The South had no civil rights bill had ever passed the Senate. One of the things that Johnson said was behind what Johnson was thinking was, we have to show people that the Senate can pass a civil rights bill, that it is possible. There are a lot of tangible reasons which I examine in the book, and there's one very intangible one, which is so many senators were afraid of the Southerners, what they would do to them in their committees, that just once he had to show that their power could be at least modified.
Kansas, Olathe, Kansas, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm a big fan of Mr. Caro's books.
Thanks.
It's like a page turner. You just can't put it down whenever you read your books.
Thanks.
My question is about LBJ. I think he's the greatest when he passes the civil rights laws, but I think he might be the worst when it comes to the war on poverty and the $5 trillion. And I think that it didn't aid the Negro either when they started receiving all the welfare. I'm wondering if he did that money, the voting of the welfare, to keep blacks indebted to the Democratic Party.
Thanks.
I've said too many times today that I haven't finished my own work on that, so I don't know the answer to that excellent question.
Here is a question from Kurt Lundgren of Minneapolis. Has any new information surfaced in the intervening years which would affect what you've written in volumes 1 and 2 of the Years of Lyndon Johnson, specifically the White House tape recordings?
Nothing that would affect anything I've written.
I asked you earlier about the White House tape recordings. By the way, have you listened to them?
Oh, yeah, I've listened to a lot of them, yeah.
San Francisco, you're on the air. San Francisco?
Hello?
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes. I have 3 questions.
Okay.
One, Mr. Keller, in your approach to your subjects, do you consider yourself a writer or a historian? And what, in your opinion, is the difference? The second question I have is more about how you do your work. Do you write in longhand or a computer or a typewriter? And then the third question is, Lyndon Johnson is supposed to have said something to the effect that the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965 would lead to the demise of the Democratic Party in the South. Do you know whether he said that? And if he believed this in 1965, he must have sensed it in 1957. So why then do you suppose that he pushed ahead with the Civil Rights Act in 1957?
Thanks.
To take the middle question, because I don't want these 3 hours to pass with all you out there under a misapprehension about the fact that I'm a Luddite. I actually write in pencil my first few drafts, and then I type on a typewriter, and I don't use a computer. Do I consider myself a writer or a historian? That's actually a great question, because I consider myself both, and I think that if we had time to talk about that, we'd really get to the heart of a lot about history in America today. First, I have to do everything the historian does. I have to go through all the papers, all the archives. I have to do the interviews. I have to do the research. Now, there are some historians, David McCullough, Edmund Morris, others, who also are wonderful writers and do what I then try to do, which is to say, I'm not just going to put the facts down. I'm going to make the reader see what was happening, feel what was happening, because that's the truest way of showing history. If passing the 1957 Civil Rights Act was thrilling, and it was thrilling, isn't it being untrue to history if you don't make the reader feel that drama and that thrill?
We're out of time, but I'm going to grab this one quickly from Washington, D.C. for Robert Caro. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Hey,
I'm
glad I got in.
Turn your TV down, please, and keep talking. We're out of time.
It's something that I wanted to say if I had to write it myself. Lyndon Johnson has done more for black people in his presidency than any president. Lincoln, yes, that has his place. Kennedy, no, even though they had pictures of him. Lyndon Johnson. I have documented that, and I've always wanted to tell Mr. Johnson that, and thank you, sir.
Good note then? Without any.
But will the blacks like what they read about what he thought behind the scenes about Mexicans and black people?
No, they certainly won't.
And in the end, do you think he did it sincerely, or do you think that it was a cynical move on his part for his own political reasons?
I think neither of those things. I think it's so much a complicated intermingling of things that I've only begun to deal with it in this book, and it's going to get more complicated yet.
When you get the book, if you buy it, this is what the inside cover looks like. It's the Senate when Lyndon Johnson was there without the television lights and the television cameras. Here's what the cover looks like. It will be in your bookstores on April the 23rd, the third book about Lyndon Johnson by Robert Caro. He's worked on his subject for over 25 years. Our 3 hours are up, and we thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And to our audience, have a good day.